Okay, calm down. You got rivers, man. You got rivers, man. Okay, calm down.
Hello and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. We are so excited to be here with you. We have such a special show for you today. We are going to be speaking to a friend of the show, one of the definitely favorite guests of this show, none other than Norman Finkelstein. That is who we're going to be spending the majority of tonight with, and we're going to be talking to him live. Then after our interview with Norman Finkelstein, I'm going to be playing a big chunk of an interview that I did with Whitney Webb. And to see the rest of that interview, you can find that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And Whitney and I will talk about P. Diddy, Epstein, and then to see the full show where we talk about Elon Musk, Israel, Trump, you can do that again at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Before I bring on Norman, just want to remind people to please do like the stream. That's a way to support the show for free. And it just helps with the algorithm. And of course, we have to constantly try to beat back the algorithm because there is a lot of suppression, especially when you're talking about the things that we talk about on this show. So give it a thumbs up. Also, subscribe. If you're not already a subscriber, please subscribe by hitting subscribe and then pressing the bell. And now, without further ado, I'm going to bring on Norman Finkelstein, who, as people know, is a political scientist, prolific author, and he also is the author of many books that have been translated into 60 foreign editions, including The Holocaust Industry, Reflections on the Exploitation of Jewish Suffering, and Gaza, an Inquest into Martyrdom. I'll burn that bridge when I get to it. Heretical Thoughts and Identity Politics, Cancel Culture, and Academic Freedom. And in the year 2020, Norman was named the 5th most influential political scientist in the world. So let's bring that. I'm going to call him 4th, at least, if not 1st, most influential political scientist, Norman Finkelstein. Welcome to the show, Norman.
Well, thank you, Katie, for having me. And it's always my pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you. So we're going to be talking about this book, which I think it's fair to, the technical word for it is that it's a bit schlocky. And it is Antisemitism in America, a Warning by Senator Chuck Schumer. You're, of course, well positioned in multiple ways to talk about this book. Do you want to start off by why you think a discussion about this book is important? And then we can jump into some videos that show some of the ideas that he expresses in his book. But yeah, let's start off by talking about why this is even a relevant discussion.
Well, he is the former Senate Majority Leader. He's currently the Senate Minority Leader. He's very influential and he's smart. So I thought picking up the book, that even though I was sure I wouldn't agree with it, that he would give me a run for the money, that he would be mentally testing me, and I would, as I turned the pages, be struggling with how do I answer that argument? How would I answer that argument? That's what I anticipated, but that's not what happened. It was the book was remarkably uninteresting to the point that even though it's a relatively short book, I was struggling to get through it. I found myself looking, when does this chapter end? So I have an excuse to put it aside for a few minutes or an hour. And there was nothing, I can not say there was anything provocative in the book. On the other hand, it's indicative of some things. It's indicative of how a very bright young man, and still, I suppose, mentally sharp, how disappointing his performance was. And it's indicative of, it was indicative to me that even though he lived a rich life, he started out in a modest Jewish neighborhood. He was by any reckoning, a brilliant student. And then he entered the inner sanctums of the hallowed halls of academia. He then went on to become a US senator. It felt as if Chuck Schumer, for all of his worldliness, meeting all the leaders on the world stage, being at the center of power, for all of his worldliness, it felt by the end that he had never left the shtetl, that he was still, I'm not trying to say this in a pejorative way, I'm just saying it as an observation. He was still a shtetl Jew, and it struck me at how old he felt in the pages of the book. It was as if he were reciting a story by a 90-year-old, not a 74, or I suppose he's 75 years old now. But he was, in his mental liveliness, he fell so far short of his neighbor, who also attended the same high school as him, namely Bernie Sanders. Chuck Schumer lived on East 27th Street. Bernie Sanders, who attended the same high school, James Madison High School, lived, if my memory is right, on East 25th or 26th Street. And yet, there was so much more of a mental exuberance in reading Bernie's book, Our Revolution. And when you listen to him, for all of his limitations, his meaning Bernie's limitations and shortcomings, there is still a recognition that something has gone seriously wrong in that Jewish state. And sometimes Bernie will limit his acknowledgement of what went wrong to Netanyahu, as if everything were coming up roses before then. But there's some recognition that, to use the cliche, there's something rotten in that Jewish state.
In Tel Aviv.
But there's no such recognition, really, by Schumer. So it felt so old to read him. Even the books he cites basically pot boilers, like the Simon Schama books. Simon Schama is a good historian, but a lot of these good historians, they just turn out pot boilers that you put on your coffee table. So he cites Simon Schama, he cites Paul Johnson, he cites only just a couple of serious scholarly works. And all of the scholarship since the late 1980s, what came to be called the Israeli New Historians, all of that scholarship is absent from the pages of his book. It's just the same old story without any awareness. And maybe there is no awareness. Maybe it's not just a put on. Without any awareness that so many of the myths about Israel were shattered already in the late 1980s and early 1990s.
Right. That's always a fun game to play, right? Lying or ignorant.
Yes, it's lying and ignorance, and it's also unclear whether he believes the things that he says, or he's saying them to placate, to appease his donors. You can't really tell. And probably, as in most of these cases, it's an alloy of both.
Right.
It's true believing, and at the back of his mind, he has to appease his donors.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I thought that, and by the way, we should say in full disclosure that you, Norman, also went to this very impressive school that produced Bernie, Bernie Sanders, Chuck Schumer, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Carole King. Who else? Am I missing?
Actually, first of all, I want to stress, because it's an important part of our own history as Americans and as New Yorkers, it was not a special school. It was an ordinary public
school, right?
School.
Yeah.
And whenever I hear these claims about how these, the public high schools, they have failed our students, not really. I don't know, Katie, how well you know New York. Are you a New Yorker?
Oh yeah, of course. My mom went to LaGuardia. It was then Music and Art. LaGuardia Music and Art, and then went to City College, and then went from City College to do her PhD at Columbia. My dad went to Jamaica High in Queens, and then went to Columbia undergrad and Columbia Med School.
Well, then you know that all of these high schools are really magnificent edifices. They all look exactly alike. They take up a full city block. They're made of not brick, white. I'm not sure what the building material is. Not flagstone. I'm not sure. In any event, they're all named after presidents: Abraham Lincoln, James Madison, George Washington, James Monroe. They're all, and they were very successful experiments in public education. And so I was just going to mention, actually, you left out the most impressive aspect of our graduates. There were not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, 6. Sit down, Katie, embrace yourself. 6 Nobel laureates.
Wow.
In economics and in the natural sciences from Madison High School. Yeah, it was a very impressive show. And Chuck Schumer was, even though he was 4 years ahead of me, he was a known quantity. Definitely. He left a legacy at the school.
Well, let's take a. Oh, sorry. Was that me or okay? Let's take a look at Chuck Schumer. Again, we have this book that is not very impressive. He definitely didn't leave a positive legacy with this. But I thought we could watch his appearance hawking his book on The View, because he says a lot of things and expresses a lot of sentiments and ideas that are in the book, but it's more dynamic, obviously, to see them in the form of a video. So let's take a look at him on The View recently. And if you want me to pause, let me know, and I'll just pause. Just put up your hand or start talking, whatever.
Your book.
Yes,
because you're here to talk about this, a new book, Antisemitism
Okay, and she's wearing the yellow ribbon, by the way. Okay.
In America, a warning. Now, as the highest-ranking Jewish official in the U.S., this is clearly
ever, by the way, ever.
Ever.
Who would have thought an exterminator's son?
Well, I mean, given his position on the genocide, it's not that the apple doesn't fall far from the extermination tree, but
it's very personal to you.
It is.
Why are you writing it now?
Okay, good. So I was born in 1950, and it was sort of called the golden era for Jews in America and in our whole history, because first America was all moving up. You know, my father, my grandpa worked in the paper mills. My father moved up and became a little more in the middle class. Everyone was. So that was a great moment. But for the Jewish people, it was an amazing time. When there's been so much anti-Semitism in 5,000 years of history, there was almost none in America. And the reason, to tell you the truth, the Holocaust and the horror of the Holocaust hung like a curtain over America. So in the past, when Jews were excluded from living in a certain place, from going to a certain company, or all that sort of went away, and even the innuendo language went away. In 2000, it started to change a little bit, because what we've learned, folks.
I mean, what's weird about this, and it's very weird because I'm not someone who usually points to anti-Semitism, but it's not like there wasn't anti-Semitism in the United States, right? There were jobs, there were country clubs that you just couldn't apply to, you couldn't get into.
He acknowledges that in the book. I'm not quite sure why he chose to white it out, or he just was speaking in such broad generalizations that he didn't want to focus on the details, although the details are important. But what's most striking to me is this complete mythology about how it was, quote unquote, the Holocaust that caused the extinction or gradual extinction of anti-Semitism in our country. This is, and I have to keep prefacing myself by saying, with all due respect, I respect his intellect. I don't respect his politics. I think, and I'll say it frankly, he's a moral monster, and we can return to why I attach that label to him. But I respect his intellect. Now, he was born in 1950. I was born in 1953. So not a
You look a lot younger than him. Not just saying that.
So not a huge difference in time separates us. So let me get the facts straight. And I have written a book, The Holocaust Industry, Reflections on the Exploitation of Jewish Suffering, which in at least the first half is personal remembrance. So here are the facts. The Nazi Holocaust was completely absent from American life after World War II, and also and emphatically absent from American Jewish life after World War II. So let me give you some examples. Number one, if you look at Nathan Glazer, was the senior Jewish sociologist. He was a sociologist in general, but he was also Jewish, and he did do work in the Jews in the United States. In 1958, he writes a book, Jews in America, something like that. I can't remember the exact title. And he says it's a striking fact that two things are absent from Jewish life in America. You know what the two things were? You'll be surprised. Now, remember, he's not writing for us, a contemporary audience. He's writing for his audience in 1958.
Israel and the Holocaust.
Israel and the Holocaust.
I read your book, so.
Yeah, they're completely absent from American Jewish life.
Right.
Now,
insane.
I will proceed. First of all, if you look at Hannah Arendt's book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, it's published in 1964. It's her recollections, but it was also very scholarly, academic recollections in the Eichmann trial. The Eichmann trial occurs in 1961. Now, if you look at the bibliography in her book, you're going to be very surprised by this. There were only 2 books in the English language on the Nazi Holocaust. Raoul Hilberg's The Destruction of the European Jews, and then a book on the Nazi SS. That is it. There was no scholarship on the Nazi Holocaust. Now, you might say, well, what about Anne Frank's diary? Wasn't that read in school? That's true. That's factually correct. I can't say it was read in all schools, But in my school, which is all Jewish, there was no non-Jews. There were 2 non-Jews in my class in grade school, Robert Kinney and Virginia DeMario, and everyone else was Jewish. I remember their names because they were the only non-Jews in the class.
Affirmative action admissions.
Well, they lived in the neighborhood. Virginia was very smart. Robert Kinney was also bright, but not in the class of Virginia. In any event, when we read Anne Frank's diary, we did not, and I emphasize, we did not read it as a manifestation or expression of Jewish suffering. We read it as human suffering. You weren't supposed to look at it as a Jewish experience. It was to be seen, I'm not saying for the worse, maybe for the better, but it was to be seen as a horrible episode in Jewish suffering. Now, let me bring it down to.
Wait, sorry, you said it was to be seen as a horrible episode in Jewish? Human, yeah, human, not Jewish, yeah, human, yeah.
Stop me when I make errors like that, otherwise I kick myself at home at night. So, yeah, stop me to correct myself. Now, bring it to myself. My parents were survivors of the real survivors, as my mother liked to say, the real McCoys, because so many people faked being survivors of the camps. My parents were typically a survivor was in the camp, in the ghetto, then the camps, and then the slave labor camps. They were in all 3. So to take the examples of my mother and father, my mother was in the Warsaw Ghetto, as was my father. Then they were deported to Majdanek concentration camp. And then my mother was deported to 2 slave labor camps. My father was deported to Auschwitz, but he was in the labor part of the camp. I think he was an electrician, but I can't say for sure. He had this thing with, at home, we lived in a different era. And when you had to fix the electricity, you would take out the plier and work, with the, what were they called? It wasn't, not volts. What is it called? I can't remember.
Watts?
No, but in the it wasn't the electricity box. It was something else. In any case.
Oh, the switch thing.
It was before switches.
Oh, okay. Okay.
In any case, my father used to take out the pliers,
not the
which
fuse.
had no rubber on them, and he would the fuse box.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Fuse box, yeah.
And he would just stick the pliers. I go, Daddy, what are you doing? I was totally terrified. But he had so much confidence from his experience in the concentration camp that I assumed that he must have been working with electricity in the concentration camp. In any event, and every single member of our family on both sides, no exceptions. My mother's mother, my mother's father, my mother's 3 siblings, exterminated. My father's father, father's mother, my father, I think he had 2 siblings. We never talked about it. They were also exterminated. So on both sides of the family, only one person survived. So, as you can imagine, Katie, that's in a horrible way, that's a rich history. It's a rich history. Now, nobody ever asked me about that. Nobody ever, not a friend. Bear in mind, I wasn't in their league, but I hung out with the smartest people. I like to be among them, and yet, and this was the 1960s where the atmosphere was charged with politics and history. This was the era of the Vietnam War, the anti-war movement, and so forth. I could say if a polygraph were put to my wrist, without fear of a single beat being missed, from grade school till senior year in high school, not one person ever, or parent of a person, ever asked me a single question about what my parents had passed through during the war. Now, you might say, well, maybe that was discretion.
Right.
No, it was total.
These are Jews. We're talking about Jews, so there was no discretion.
You know, that's actually a point. I didn't want to say, but I won't go into it, but that's a point. There was no interest in the subject. And so when I read in Schumer's book and listening to him now on The View, in his book, he says, we used to sit around the table during dinner, talking about the Holocaust. And I'm thinking, who are you kidding? Where did you come up with this idea? I am not about to pretend to things that are not. However, that being said, I knew Chuck Schumer's sister, friend, brilliant young woman, and mentally interesting. She wasn't just a nerd. She was an interesting person. She happened to be the girlfriend of my best friend, Mark Cohn, who was actually even brighter than her, and that's a very high standard. Mark passed from cancer a couple of years ago. He was the chief technology officer at Unisys, the computer corporation in Washington. In any event, so we passed occasional time together. Certainly, I knew her on a first person basis. She never asked me anything about my parents.
Right. Well, I think that
I want to briefly explain that. Why was there such indifference? Part of it, Senator Schumer gets right. He gets right. He says Jews were embarrassed by the Nazi Holocaust because it was said of Jews that they went like sheep to slaughter. So it was a source of, it's a strong word, but it's not totally wrong. It was a source of humiliation as to what happened to the Jews during World War II. So Schumer correctly says that's why Jews surged with pride after the June 1967 war, because they were now seen as fighters, not just fighters, but the hero of the 67 war was, of course, Moshe Dayan, who wore the pirate's patch on his eye, and he was known to be a womanizer. So for Jews, this was a kind of redemption of their manhood from the blight of the Nazi Holocaust. Number two, as Senator Schumer correctly says, suddenly all these opportunities opened up for Jews. So they were looking forward. They weren't looking backward. They were out to conquer the world. And you know what, Katie? Are you ready for this? They did. If you enter my high school and you look at the front, there are pictures of all the notables who made it from James Madison High School. And it is a who's who of America. They did conquer the commanding heights of American society. So they were looking forward. they don't want to look backward at the horror that befell the Jews. And then there's a third reason, which is worth mentioning for your audience. The third reason was, who was America's chief ally in Europe after World War II? It was Germany.
Oh, yeah, right.
It was Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany. And so if you brought up the Nazi Holocaust, it was seen as undermining, delegitimizing our alliance with Germany. Because aside from people like Chancellor Adenauer, the whole German bureaucracy was staffed with former Nazis.
Right.
I mean, if you were anti-fascist, you went to the East.
Right.
The German Democratic Republic, the GDR, or in Germany, the DDR. And if you were pro-fascist, you were in the German bureaucracy. So it was the Soviets, the Russians, who kept bringing up the Nazi Holocaust in order to delegitimize the US alliance with them. And so American Jews knew to stay quiet about the Holocaust, because that was, to bring it up, was seen as being pro-communist and un-American.
And that changes, of course, in a little sneak preview of the Holocaust industry. That changes, of course, in 1967.
Yes, it changes completely in 1967, but we won't go into that.
That's another discussion. Yeah.
Only to say that that part of Schumer's book, it perplexed me. Why are you making that up?
Probably
there was no interest in the Nazi Holocaust, and it had nothing to do why the world opened up to Jews after World War II. It is a question. I remember discussing it because Professor Chomsky was part of that era. Remember, people like Professor Chomsky and Paul Samuelson, the Nobel laureate in economics, they ended up at MIT because Harvard wouldn't take Jews. They didn't, it was still that barrier in the early 50s. And then things opened up in a spectacular way. Exactly why I couldn't say, but it was not the Nazi Holocaust. The Nazi Holocaust was absent from American life and notably absent from American Jewish life.
Right. I mean, I think maybe we can hypothesize about this more later, but it may be like a way to, to continue the weaponization of the Holocaust.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
he does.
To pretend as if it was always a fraught subject for Jews. No, it wasn't.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And let's go back to the clip, because there's so much more, unfortunately, to get through. And I should have done a trigger warning before that.
There's trouble often, not in America, but even now in America, but in the past in America, people, they did in the past, but when there's trouble in the world, people often turn on the Jews. Yeah. That's been true for centuries of history. And so we had 9/11, and a few people were saying, oh, the Jews did it, they all escaped. Then we had the financial crisis caused by the Jewish bankers. But it was really never that bad until 2017. And until October 7th.
Just wanted to let him correct himself, yeah.
Okay. Another striking misrepresentation of the factual reality. If you go back, I'll just pull it off the shelf, if you don't mind. So, in 2005, I write a book called Beyond Chutzpah on the Misuse of Anti-Semitism and the Abuse of History. And the first third of the book is devoted to documenting how, ever since the 1970s, there have been these periodic orchestrations of what they called the new anti-Semitism. So if you now, Katie, will go on your Google and enter new anti-Semitism, you'll see that probably about 50 to 100 listings come up. Every time Israel suffers a public relations debacle because of one or another horror that it has inflicted, the usually was the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, would put out these books called The New Anti-Semitism. So that was in the mid 1970s, 1982, after the Lebanon War. There's a book called The Real Antisemitism. And then after Operation Cast Lead, when Israel carried out one of its high-tech killing sprees in Gaza, and there was a very big reaction to it, there was this whole slew of books called The New Anti-Semitism. So this claim by Senator Schumer that now, for the first time, there is concern about the rise of the new anti-Semitism, it's simply to efface a history which he for sure lived through and for sure remembers. Right now, it's true. It's true. The hostility towards Israel, and there is a spillover to some extent, the hostility towards Israel and the spillover to some extent to Jews. Yes, it's reached a new level. You know why it's reached a new level? It's very simple. Because Israel's barbarism has reached a new level.
Right.
If there was the killing sprees in Operation Cast Lead and Operation Defensive Shield in 2014, Cast Lead in 2008-9, if there was an escalation since then, it is because Israel, for the first time, is attempting in broad daylight to carry out a genocide. So the reaction is naturally going to be at a different level than what occurred in the past. But still, you know, as historians say, you always have to look at continuity as well as change.
Right.
And the continuity is easily documented. You just go to Google or go to Amazon and enter new anti-Semitism, and you'll see a very large number of titles come up, long preceding the October 8th and thereafter events.
Right. All righty. Back to the videotape. Oh, okay. Or this, yeah. Here's an example of all the anti-Semitism books. Wow. Thanks, Brad. All right. Let's go back to The View.
Last year.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden,
When the Jews were attacked
when the
by
Jews were
Hamas.
attacked by Hamas initially, and the women raped, and the little babies' heads chopped off.
Okay. The women rape thing, fine. It's not documented, but it hasn't been debunked in mainstream media. In other words, it is not true. There's no evidence of it. I guess I'm being generous to Chuck and saying,
I agree with you.
yeah, right. So like the
But the-
babies beheaded, though, that has been publicly corrected. Like, so it's totally inexcusable. to say.
And there's where the perplexity arises. Does he know he's
Right,
lying?
Lying or ignorant. Right. Which one?
Is he
Or a combo.
know? Is he ignorant? Is it just the shtetl Jew who repeats what his friends in synagogue say? It's very hard to tell.
I think it was too public because it was reported on by mainstream publications that Biden said that about the beheaded babies, despite being told by staffers not to. So either he's intentionally lying or it's some kind of denial. But it's, I mean, and the way he does that with his yeah, here you go. Well, this is out, to be fair, Brad, this is Al Jazeera. So, I mean, it may not be the best example of it, but I think we can find more mainstream examples of it. I mean, obviously, I'm not doubting it just because it's Al Jazeera. I'm saying that Chuck Schumer probably doesn't peruse Al Jazeera. But okay, so he does that. He even does the finger.
There is one other aspect.
Yeah.
If he doesn't know those things, why is he writing a book on the subject?
Really good question. Yeah.
If you don't even know the most elementary facts, that the beheading story was debunked.
Right.
An elementary fact. If you don't know that, why are you pontificating on the subject? Why are you writing a book on the subject? There are many things you do know. I don't know about the American banking system. Chuck Schumer sat on the House, and they probably later Senate banking committee. Fine, write a book on that.
Right.
But you just really, you don't have a clue what you're talking about.
Right.
If you look, it's a tiny point, but there are no footnotes. So you can't even check any of his references. There is in the back chapter, he lists titles.
Yeah.
But you have no idea where he's getting any of this from. I did try to track down some of the stuff, and it was completely, okay, some of it, there's, claims made, whether they were documented. But let me give you one example, since we were talking about the Nazi Holocaust, and you can get back to the Chucky show, the Chucky Joy show.
Right. You know she's not Jewish, by the way? Did you know Joy Behar's not Jewish?
No, I didn't know that.
She's married to a Jewish guy, yeah. No. She's Italian. Anyway.
Listen, we have enough troubles. We don't need Joy
Yeah,
Behar.
you're right, yeah. It's a mitzvah that she's not, yeah.
Right, and thank God Whoopi Goldberg is not Jewish either.
Sure.
In any event, so since we were talking about the Nazi Holocaust, he has a reference in the book in order to illustrate the fact that anti-Semitism is rife. He has this fact in the book. He says 30% of Americans polled, of young Americans polled, 30% weren't sure, didn't believe the Nazi Holocaust happened, and 20% weren't sure. So he says, isn't this a terrible problem? Let me see, give me 1/2 moment. Okay, give me a second.
By the way, while Norman's doing this is a great time for you guys to give this show a thumbs up. Give it a like. Back, where are we on the likes? We have less than half of the viewers have liked. So guys, let's give it a thumbs up. I know half of you aren't hate watching. Some of you are hate watching. We're not even at halfway.
Hate watching, is that a new expression?
Yeah, well, it's what I assume. Okay, now we got to 1K. Good, yeah. I mean, it's what I try to figure out sarcastically how so many people could be watching and not liking, but it's just people aren't trained really. I have to crack the whip to make sure they like. Love watching. Corey Grebe is love watching. That's good. I would do some reading, but I suspect that you, like me, Norman, it's hard for you to concentrate when someone else is talking.
No, you can read.
Oh, really? I think it's my ADHD, so I can hear. Well, there's a lot in this to talk about, but there's some funny parts where he talks about how his great grandfather or something was like, all he did was study, but then it turns out that he had like 13 kids. So some Republican from the Midwest was like, no, it wasn't the only thing. It wasn't just all the things. I'm messing this up. He did more than study was the line. But he one of the things that he does that isn't surprising is that when he documents the alleged rise in anti-Semitism, the skyrocketing in anti-Semitism, he cites the Anti-Defamation League. And we know the Anti-Defamation League has very problematic definitions of anti-Semitism to such an extent that people have quit the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, because they did not believe that they were actually tracking anti-Semitism. They consider groups like Jewish Voice for Peace a hate group. So if you have a Jewish Voice for Peace protest, that's probably an anti-Semitic act, according to them. What else is important here? Also, this is just a linguistic thing. He says anti-Semitism is often the canary in the coal mine. No, that's not right. That's just syntactically not right. Anti-Semitism isn't the canary in the coal mine. It would be Jews are the canaries in the coal mine, right?
He does that so many times.
Yeah.
The English is so appalling.
Yeah.
And then he has the nerve, I think it's chutzpah, to thank his family for helping him edit the book.
Oh, he really threw them under the bus.
That's such an insult.
Yeah, seriously.
Her sister Fran was writing for the New York Times book review in her early 20s.
She should issue a denial.
And to blame her for that prose, that's just shocking.
Yeah.
And then he writes on page 85, according to a 2023 online poll by YouGov and The Economist, 20% of young Americans aged 18 to 29 believe the Holocaust is a myth. Another 30% were not sure if the Holocaust was a myth. That means half of all young Americans reached by the poll had substantial doubt about whether the Holocaust, the largest and most studied genocide of the 20th century, was a real event. Well, of course, I was curious about that fact, and here, for a change, I could check it. So you can ask your colleague Brad to just enter YouGov Economist Holocaust 2023 online poll. So rather than me say anything, I'd rather he just bring it up on the screen.
Yeah.
So can we just wait for the miracle?
There we go.
The miracle. Now, can Brad read for us, because he can be objective? This is what comes up. This is what Chuck Schumer cites. Now read the editor's note. Can you read the editor's note?
That's about all he can read because it's paywalled, so you may have to do an archive. But okay.
Well, you could start reading.
Yeah.
Editor's note, 27th March 2024. After this article was published, the Pew Research Center conducted a study on this topic. It found that young respondents in opt-in online polls such as YouGov's were far more likely to say the Holocaust was a myth than were those surveyed by other methods, and that in general, young and Hispanic participants in such polls are unusually prone to providing, quote, bogus answers that do not reflect their true views.
Now, if you turn to the Pew poll that the editors referred to, do you know what was the percentage that believed the Nazi Holocaust didn't happen? You ready? Among young people, you know what the percentage was? 3%. 3%. Not 50, 3%. And he had to have known that because the poll comes with the editor's note.
Yeah, but also that's also really inappropriate for the and they always do this, but to not update the headline also.
Well, I prefer that. So
then
you don't have
to the stealth edit.
Yes, because you want to know the
Right.
sequence of events.
Sure,
They
yeah.
first said that, and then they're effectively issuing a correction.
Yeah.
I made certain statements immediately after October 7th, And those statements did not take into account the new information that became available later. And I was called to account for those statements. And I told them new information, new assessment of the situation. And then they thought they had a gotcha. And they said, well, why didn't you take down what you wrote? And I said, because I don't believe in censorship. I wrote that. I'm not going to pretend I didn't write it. I'm not going to be like Mr. Stalin when he would white out Trotsky.
Thank God your parents aren't alive to hear you say that,
Yeah,
Norman.
no, you're correct. You're correct. God is great. God is okay. So I wasn't going to do it. But the important point is, Mr. Senator Schumer, or whomever wrote the book, had to know that figure was wrong. It's not 50%. It's 3%. In other words, fewer people doubt the Nazi Holocaust than doubt that Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. Fewer people doubt the Nazi Holocaust than doubt that Michelle Obama is a woman. It is by far the best established, or I should say, entrenched in the American psyche of any historical fact. So it does disturb again that he's not only misinforming, but there is an element, a documentable element of conscious disinformation. He is consciously misrepresenting the facts.
Right. Like with Biden.
I want to just check with Brad because I am a stickler for facts. I am correct, Brad, that it says 3%, correct? The Pew poll found 3%. Is that correct?
Well, I will look further into it, Norman. Let's see.
You just Google 3%, and that one should pop up.
Opt-in findings on Holocaust denial on probably based on young adults' views of the Holocaust. So the American trends, this blue right here is 3%. Yes.
Yeah, 50, that age cohort, because he was talking about young people. It was 3%. That's just, how shall I put it? It's unacceptable. On those grounds alone, the book has completely delegitimized itself, in my opinion. Now, you made an interesting point a moment ago. You said his legacy certainly won't be enhanced by this book. And that poses an interesting question. Why did he then do it? He knows schlock. He knows schlock. He's got to know the book was schlock. Why did he do it? And I'll get to that later in our conversation, why I believe he
produced this schlock.
He inflicted this wound on himself. Part of it you could get because there's so much over-the-top felling by him that, as you noticed, when the person said to him, "You are the third most powerful Jew in the country," he stopped.
Ever.
Yeah, and if you have any doubt about that, it's on every 5th page of the book.
Right. He also compares himself to Moses implicitly and then explicitly says, not that I compared myself to Moses, but he basically just had compared himself to Moses.
Actually, I was more offended when he compared that Holocaust charlatan, the Holocaust profiteer, Elie Wiesel, to my
I know, that was awful. Yeah, that was disgusting. Yeah. All right, back to the Chucky show.
The Chucky show. The Chucky and Joy show.
The Chucky and Joy show.
All of that brutally. And all of a sudden, anti-Semitism developed, not just protesting what Israel was doing. That's legitimate. I've criticized, as you know, Netanyahu because I think he didn't handle the war exactly right.
Overkill.
But
Overkill. Okay. Well, I mean, we'll keep playing this, but his criticism of Netanyahu is that he's lost his way and he's bad for Israel. It's not
Yeah.
about what he does to Palestinians.
What?
Totally
Real
correct.
anti-Semitism. So a Jewish bakery, they threw a rock through the window. You're a Zionist. There's a woman who lives near me. She's head of the Brooklyn Museum. She's Jewish. She has nothing to do with Israel. They painted red paint all over her house.
Okay, so that's one thing that's not true. It was various people affiliated with the museum who were not Jewish also had the same thing happen to them. So that's another totally misleading anecdote.
Well, you should explain the context. Why did it happen?
Because of something they wanted them to divest. Was that the issue?
I don't recall the detail.
Yeah, but it was something that had, yeah. But even so, I mean, context aside, and it wasn't just a random, let's throw red paint at someone who happened to be Jewish. I mean, they targeted people who were not Jewish. The majority of the people they targeted were not Jewish. So that's kind of significant. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Let's keep going. Can we keep playing?
Or yarmulkes or Jewish stars were punched and vilified and all did red paint all over her house. People who wore yarmulkes or Jewish stars were punched and vilified. And all sorts of nasty terms were thrown, not just for people for their support of it. There was a scene in New York, people got on a subway car. Whoever's a Zionist, stand up and raise your hand. That didn't mean whoever's a Zionist. They didn't know what whoever's a Jew.
Wait, why doesn't it mean, I mean, you may not like that, but why does that mean that's not code?
I actually watched that video. You know, I was curious. Have you seen the video?
No, I haven't.
Listen, young people are young people. You may not like it.
Right.
They have a certain kind of self-indignation, idealistic indignation, playfulness, and also there's an element normal in young people of being extreme in their opinions. During the war in Vietnam, we chanted, a large number of young people chanted, ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, the NLF is going to win.
Right.
We were calling for them to defeat our soldiers. We were not just wanting the war to end and for our troops to come home. We were celebrating, ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, the NLF is going to win. In the era of the Black Panthers, you know what the most popular slogan was? Off the pig.
Oh,
you know what off the pig meant?
Kill, you know who's. I don't want us to get demonetized or banned, but yes, we know what that means. Right.
Kill the cops. And we all chanted.
Norman is not saying that. Norman is not saying that. He's making a point about, yeah. I know. Just so the Google.
In any radical movement, you're going to have people saying it. If you actually look at the video, it was kind of funny. Look, I'm not trivializing anti-Semitism, but I wouldn't have been scared. Young people went in the train. They said, anyone here a Zionist?
Right.
Nobody raised that. So the guy says, well, nobody's raising their hand. We can go home.
Yeah. But even so, it's like, I mean, he didn't say Jewish. He said Zionist. And every time that like someone like Chuck conflates those two things, he's making more anti-Semitism. But
so, look, I teach a class in the laws of war. One of my students, he says, I don't see why in war you can't kill the prisoners. Why do you have to hold them? Or why do you have to keep them? Because that's a drain in our resources. And a student in my class of Arabic Muslim background, he shouted across the room, you sound like a Zionist. I don't even know if the fellow who made the first comment was Jewish. He was using Zionists in a broad sense of killer, murderer, or something like that. So I have no idea. But I don't think there's any point in being in denial that incidents happened. How could they not happen? if the state that's carrying out the genocide
Right.
finds itself as the nation state of the Jewish people, then that state is implicating all Jews in what they do. Now, Mr. Schumer notes at the end of the book that 60% of Jews, American Jews, support the way Israel is carrying out its military action in Gaza. Well, if a large majority support it, it can't altogether be surprising if there's a large hostility directed against Jews, not only because it's the nation state of the Jewish people that's carrying out the genocide, but judging by the poll Mr. Schumer cited, an overwhelming majority of Jews support it. Now, as I said, I don't make any excuses for random, idiotic actions. Something, in terms of October 7th and beyond, so far as I know, nothing lethal has happened, but even the random actions, of course, I'm not going to excuse it, but is it significant? Is it a significant number of incidents? He claims that the encampments were anti-Semitic. Now,
but also, just 1 second, I just have to interject, which is like, also, what about the kid who was stabbed to death, the Palestinian kid who was stabbed to death, the 3 Palestinians who were shot, one of whom at least is paralyzed, the hate crimes, a woman tried to drown some kids. I mean, it's just the double standards. And I know that you know this and much of my audience knows this, but it's just, I mean, it's remarkable, the chutzpah to talk about one side of bigotry and not the other side. And again, look, there are one-off examples, sure, but the examples he brings up happen to not be about Jewishness.
It's not just the one-sidedness, although that's certainly critical. It's the complete lack of self-awareness. So he describes after October 7th, he was on some congressional delegation. I think it was in China, but I could be wrong. And then he says, after what he heard what happened, he makes a beeline for Israel because he wants to show Israel that it's not alone, like in the Holocaust. And then he says he met many times, he said, with the families of the hostages and those who suffered on October 7th. Okay, fine. But you're the senator from New York.
Right, not from Israel.
There are also Palestinians here. Did you meet with them? Did you show any consolation? Because they haven't lost 30 children. They are, at last count, they've lost 17,000 children. Have you shown any comfort, or did you try to comfort them? He says that he did meet with his critics. And you know what he said he told his critics? He reminded them how important how important it was that there be a Jewish state.
Oh, right, yeah.
Oh, that must have been very comforting.
Yeah.
As the Jewish state is carrying out a genocide in Gaza. He doesn't even have a self-awareness.
To know he shouldn't put that down.
He talks about double standards. He says people denounce Israel for the horrors it's committing in Gaza. And then he engages in, the commonplace called whataboutism. He says, but what about Sudan? What about Syria? What about Sudan, Syria, and
Saudi Arabia, is that one?
no, the Uyghurs in
Uyghurs,
China.
right. The Uyghurs, yeah.
Uyghurs. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, if that's a double standard, what about the standard that denounces the Uyghurs, denounces Bashar in Syria, and denounces Sudan, but doesn't denounce Israel?
Right.
He
Yeah,
doesn't
and
even see. He's
right.
a living embodiment. He's an incarnation of double standards,
Right.
his own.
Right.
Total.
They're built into his premise about double standards.
Well, he says at one
His own double
point,
standards.
I
Yeah.
guess it was maybe it was his mother, maybe it was his grandmother, I can't remember which. He says that in her mental universe, every question of the day reduced to one. Everything reduced to one. Is it good for the Jews?
Right.
I remember there was a cartoon, I think it was in the New Yorker magazine. It had a Jewish couple, sitting in front of a TV set, and on the screen, there's a giant mushroom cloud, as if, the dropping of an atomic bomb. And you see the wife turning to the husband, and the caption reads, "Is it good for the Jews?"
Right.
And that's not just his mother, or that was, I think, his grandmother. No, I think it was his mother. I can't remember now. One of them.
I think his grandmother, but I'm not sure.
That's the mental universe. And that's Senator Schumer's mental universe. It doesn't even occur to him that in the midst of the horrors of the past 18 months, he might want to pay a visit to the grieving Palestinians, and there and here, right here in New York City.
Right.
So we're going back to the joy of
a little bit. Yeah, we're almost done. Yeah.
So for the first time, my generation, who had lived in such a great time, is wondering. Jewish people wonder always in the back of our heads, could it happen here? So I gave a speech on the floor where I condemned anti-Semitism on the right and the left. It's in both places.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I thought, yeah.
It's really a wonder of nature that only Jewish people wonder in the back of their head.
Right.
No, and there has never been, since the dawn of humankind, there has never been a goy who wondered.
Right.
Only Jews, Jewish people, they wonder in the back of their head. Nobody else wonders.
Right.
No, Jewish people, they wonder.
A pincer.
Oh.
But I kept thinking and thinking. I felt I had to write this book. And let me just say,
by the way,
written it
sorry,
for-
one thing. Can you go back to that, Brad? Sorry, I just want to show something that I think is important.
Happen here. So I had felt
Okay, hold on
like,
a second.
but they're whoever is a Jew.
Yeah.
So for the first time, my generation,
Okay, 1 second.
who had lived in such a great time, is wondering. Jewish people wonder always in the back of our heads, could it happen here? So I gave a speech on the floor where I condemned anti-Semitism on the right and the left.
Okay, so there he goes. I condemned anti-Semitism on the right and the left, which kind of equates the two things, which is pretty absurd. But in addition to that, if you look at the book, so the chapter on anti-Semitism on the right is 24 pages long and includes 21 citations in total. And his chapter on anti-Semitism on the left is 35 pages long, so 11 pages longer than the anti-Semitism on the right chapter, and includes 14 citations in total. And 11 of the 14 citations were written before October 7th, 2023, even though his thesis is that anti-Semitism has significantly risen on the left since October 7th. So
I always have to correct myself because, as you know, my modus operandi is reading. So now when I hear the statement again, he seems to have been saying that Jews always wonder whether it might happen here. So he wasn't talking about wondering as being a peculiarly Jewish
Oh, right.
mental operation.
Right.
It was-
Yeah.
yeah. So, okay, correction. I don't watch The View. I don't watch Joy Behar. I did watch The View when, what was her name? The female comedian was on, and then they took her off because of what she was saying about Iraq, and she was getting into all, she's the female.
Janine Garofalo, but she wasn't on The View.
No. It was
Brad, Andrew, anyone know?
Oh, come on. She was a female comedian. She was thrown off The View, and she was replaced by Whoopi Goldberg.
Rosie O'Donnell?
Yeah, Rosie O'Donnell.
Oh, okay.
She got into a big argument
Right,
about
with Elizabeth Hasselbeck. Right, yeah. I forgot about that, yeah.
That was actually a very a great moment. That's why Barbara Walters threw her off at the time. In any event, let's continue.
Okay.
Both places, it's like a pincer. But I kept thinking and thinking. I felt I had to write this book. And let me just say, I've written it for 5 audiences, okay? Quickly. First, my generation. So they know they don't feel alone. Here's me, the majority leader, then majority leader, now minority leader. And we always feel alone. Here's how I felt. You're going to empathize. Second, for their children, Jewish people's children, who know the history, but not really the way we do. How, we've been suffering through all the years. You know the funny joke about the 3 lines that describe every Jewish holiday? They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. Okay, so that. It's aimed, third, it's aimed at non-Jewish people who have always been sympathetic to Jewish people and to Israel. And I know what people think, because my friends talk to me. They say, why are you so sensitive? This is not so bad. But they don't carry the 5,000 years of Jewish history on their shoulder. When things begin to get bad, they could get worse. Everyone thought the Jews were in great shape in Germany in 1920, and look what happened. I lost relatives who were marched, machine gunned down from 85 years old to 3 months old on my great-grandmother's porch. And fourth, I wrote it about anti-Semitism, right, but I wrote it particularly to the left. Me being a progressive Democrat, I thought I ought to talk to people on the left that you can't be anti-Semitic and you're sliding into it. When you say by any means necessary, does that mean kill all the Jews? When you say genocide, a vicious term, that people may not feel Israel did it the right way, but it's not genocide. It's Hamas who does genocide, who wanted to kill all the Jews wherever they are. And fifth, so I wrote it for them. And
okay, so a couple things. Thank you for writing
Let him just finish. That's because
okay. Sorry. Go back.
I hope it's Hamas who does genocide, who wanted to kill all the Jews wherever they are. And fifth, so I wrote it for them. And finally, I hope this will be read by college students, high school students who don't know the history, who don't know what's gone on. And I believe if everyone read it, and I'll tell you there's one other person who should read it. Donald Trump.
All right. Donald Trump is the last person who wants to read it. So
First of all, I appreciate his high expectations. But Chucky, nobody's going to read the book. It's so boring. It's so lacking in any individuality. It's as if, leaving aside his own kvelling, it's as if it were written by AI. Nobody is going to read the book. And for sure, nobody's going to learn from the book anything except the mythology, what the historian Benny Morris, he once said that up until what were called the new historians, beginning in the late 1980s, he said everything written by Israelis, he said it was not history. It was just myth making. So Senator Schumer never got past the myth making era in so-called Israeli and American historiography. In fact, he's so steeped in that era that in order to connect the Jewish people to the land of Israel, he invokes the song Exodus, sung by Pat Boone, who nobody in your audience could possibly have heard of. I told this story in another program. There was a movie, it was called Exodus. It was directed, I think, by a relatively well-known director, Otto Preminger.
Very well, yeah.
And it had a signature song. It was
not the Bob Marley one.
It was the song Exodus, and it went, Pat Boone sang it. This land is mine. God gave this land to me. Pure schmaltz. Every Jewish boy, yours truly included, took piano lessons, and every Jewish boy learned bum 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 bum
bum
bum bum bum bum. Actually, I bombed in my piano lessons. In any event, he says that the Jewish people, it's like the song Exodus. That's where his mind is. He's ultimately, he never found his way out of the shtetl. His generation might glance at the book. That's why in the first 140 pages, he keeps referring to the Gaza war.
Right.
It's only later that he becomes more graphic about what is actually unfolding in Gaza. He, of course, doesn't describe it as a genocide, but a lot of ugliness is revealed because he presumes correctly that most people of his age cohort, Jewish, won't get past page 140. It's just too lethally insipid. And for the rest, no young Jew is going to read the book. No non-Jew is going to read the book.
No leftist, when he calls himself a progressive Democrat, he wrote this for the left. Like anyone's going to say, oh, let's see where Chucky falls on this issue so I can orient myself. Yeah.
But that does pose the question, why did he write the book? If it weren't the 5 audiences that he was trying to reach,
right?
Why did he write the book? Now, we have to remember that Chuck Schumer is not a babe in the woods when it comes to Israel. In 2010, he met with Orthodox Jews.
I have the clip. I have this clip.
Oh, yeah.
So this is So this clip is this is really kind of stunning. So in 2010, he spoke at the Orthodox Union, which is this well-known politically conservative Jewish educational outreach and social service organization. And he didn't know he was being filmed. So let's take a listen to what he had to say about Gaza at that point. And Brad, that is clip 2. If you need some time to find that, Brad, I would also say that one significant thing is that he says that it's not genocide.
No, it's
okay. I know. No, he's going to. I just, while he finds it, I was just going to make one point. But if you want to.
Okay, I'll just.
But we have to see. It's better to see it than hear it. Okay, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll go back to his terrible record on this. But just quickly, I want to say that another point, I think, is that.
To just Google Chuck Schumer 2010.
I know where it is. Brad has to enter it in. But, okay.
Since the Palestinians in Gaza elected Hamas, well, certainly there should be humanitarian aid and people not starving to death, to strangle them economically until they see that that's not the way to go. Makes sense.
So let's play that again. Since the people in Gaza elected Hamas.
To me, since the Palestinians in Gaza elected Hamas, well, certainly there should be humanitarian aid and people not
Well, certainly there should be humanitarian aid.
starving to death,
People
to
not
strangle
starving.
them.
People not starving to death. Well, that, of course, that shouldn't happen. But to strangle them economically.
Economically until they see that that's not the way to go. Makes sense.
To strangle them economically until they see that that's not the way to go makes sense.
Yeah, I wonder if you can just repeat that because your audience may not believe, it was a little hard to hear. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want me to say it out loud or play him saying it again?
Just by him saying it.
Okay. Brad once more.
To me, since the Palestinians in Gaza elected Hamas, well, certainly there should be humanitarian aid and people not starving to death, to strangle them economically until they see that that's not the way to go.
Just,
Makes sense.
just strangle them economically.
Yeah, makes sense.
First of all, the scene, it was almost out of the protocols of the elders of Zion. It was almost like a caricature. He's meeting with these Orthodox Jews in the dark of night, not in a graveyard, but in a synagogue. And he's saying we should economically strangle the people of Gaza. Now, bear in mind, half the population of Gaza is children. So he's talking about in 2010, which is a ways ago, he's talking about economically strangling the children of Gaza. In the book, he attacks some of the right-wing, so-called right-wing, the whole spectrum is right-wing, but right-wing Israelis like Smotrich for advocating starvation in Gaza. Now, admittedly, economic strangulation is not starvation, but you know what? It's just a flea's hop. It's a flea's hop. And he was saying it already 15 years ago to economically strangle the people of Gaza, half of whom are children. So, Mr. Schumer is not an innocent babe in the woods when it comes to this question. Why then did he write the book? And here I admit I'm entering speculative territory, but I also believe informed territory. In March 2024, I'm not sure if he mentions it on The View, but he gave a major speech on what was happening in Israel and Gaza, mostly Israel. And it was a very surprising speech because, number one, he openly called for Netanyahu's.
We have this video. Do you want to show the video? It's very short. I have a 1-minute video of it.
Okay.
So here he is making a speech in Congress, and it did surprise a lot of people.
Rise to speak today about what I believe can and should be the path forward to secure mutual peace and lasting prosperity for Israelis and Palestinians. The fourth major obstacle to peace is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I have known Prime Minister Netanyahu for a very long time. While we have vehemently disagreed on many occasions, I will always respect his extraordinary bravery for Israel on the battlefield as a younger man. I believe in his heart he has his highest priority is the security of Israel. However, I also believe Prime Minister Netanyahu has lost his way by allowing his political survival to take the precedence over the best interests of Israel. He has put himself in coalition with far-right extremists like Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and as a result, he has been too willing to tolerate the civilian toll in Gaza, which is pushing support for Israel worldwide to historic lows. Israel cannot survive if it becomes a pariah. As a lifelong supporter of Israel, it has become clear to me the Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. The world has changed radically since then, and the Israeli people are being stifled right now by a governing vision that is stuck in the past.
So, number one, at that point in March, when Netanyahu had low approval ratings because of what happened October 7th, it looked like he was on his way out. And everybody was predicting that. In fact, I was on a Piers Morgan program at the time, and I said it's perfectly obvious why Netanyahu is so popular in Israel, because he represents accurately the Israeli population.
Right.
He's an obnoxious, self-righteous Jewish supremacist. He is the reflection of the overwhelming majority of Israelis in mental and moral outlook. But at that time, so everybody said, no. Look at the polls. Netanyahu's on his way out. Well, what happened? Chuck Schumer bet on the wrong horse. Like the proverbial cat in the camp song, the cat came back.
The very next day.
Yeah, and Netanyahu came back. So he bet on the wrong horse. Number two, if you listen to the whole of the speech or read the whole of the speech, he dealt with the question of whether Israel was a settler colonial state, and he dealt with the question of whether one state is the solution. Now, of course, he didn't believe Israel was a settler colonial state. Of course, he didn't believe that one state was the solution. However, he treated those slogans seriously. He did not dismiss them as anti-Semitic. Go back and check. Yeah. I was very surprised. He patiently parsed the slogans and tried to demonstrate that they were wrong-headed. But he allowed those slogans as part of the conversation. He didn't dismiss them. He didn't hurl epithets on them, anti-Semitic, anti-Semitism. He entertained them. Well, his donors were not happy with that. They could not have been happy with that. That he was saying that the Israeli prime minister should leave.
Right.
In no uncertain terms. And that prime minister, who he said was an obstacle, is still
peace.
there.
Right.
And secondly, he did not take a peremptory position. He didn't agree with it, the one state and settler clause, but he didn't peremptorily dismiss it as anti-Semitic, which is a no. You can't do that.
Right.
You can't have a conversation about these topics. They are out of bounds. And so I'm speculating, but I believe he wrote the book to get back his donors.
Interesting.
Was worried that they were going to abandon him for having betrayed Am Israel Chai, the Jewish people live, for having betrayed the Jewish people. And so this was an effort to recuperate from that loss that he suffered in March. that would be my guess why he wrote the book. And if you notice in the book, he talks about the speech. He mentions the speech and said, I'm still very proud of that speech, he says. But he casts it in a slightly different light. Or I should say, not a different light, but he puts the emphasis. He said, everything I said because I love Israel. And that's telling his donors, everything I said was because I loved Israel.
And he does push back on, he says why it's unfair. In his anti-Semitism chapter, he says it's unfair to use the term settler colonialism, talks about why, So,
he says it's unfair, the settler colonialism and the genocide charge.
Yeah.
It was interesting. What do you think? Did you notice what he left out?
Of that part?
Yeah. He left out apartheid.
Oh, yeah. Because it's just too hard to, it's just too indefensible, right? That it's like the ship sailed. Yeah. It's not going to die on that hill. Right.
The train left the station.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I think I'm not going to win that one.
Right.
Because too many Israelis are saying it's apartheid.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a lost cause. So he stuck with settler colonialism and genocide. And it was interesting on the genocide. He makes a very...
Oh my God. Well, even in that clip, he gets offended. One of the most frustrating things is the self-righteousness with which he's hurt by the term genocide. He's much more disturbed that anyone would accuse Israel of engaging in genocide than he is by the genocide or by whatever if he doesn't call it genocide, by the massacres.
What disqualifies consideration of genocide is it hurts Jewish feelings.
Yeah.
He makes these kind of half-hearted attempts to refute the charge. First, he says, well, many more Jews died during World War II. And then he drops that. He says, well, it's not really about numbers.
Right.
So
which it isn't, right.
He dismissed his own argument. Then he says, by any fair measure, it's unfair to call, by any just definition, it's unfair to call Israel genocidal. Well, but you have to give an argument there. And finally, the argument that he homes in on is he says it hurts Jewish feelings.
Yeah.
And therefore, it shouldn't be called genocide. Now,
to the vast majority of Jewish Americans, the accusation of genocide is the most painful, cruel, unfair, and vicious. I feel that unfairness quite strongly, not only because I believe it does not describe what is happening in Gaza, but because of the history of my own family.
Yeah, that's his ultimate recourse. It hurts Jewish feelings. And so he labels it anti-Semitic. If you go to the next paragraph, he says this is anti-Semitic. So if that's anti-Semitic, then it must be the case that Amnesty International is anti-Semitic.
Human Rights Watch.
Human Rights Watch is anti-Semitic. And it's nearly the case that almost every judge on the International Court of Justice, including the American judge, is anti-Semitic because they said at that point in time, January 2024, the evidence was sufficient to conclude that Israel was plausibly committing genocide. So he's not just disqualified, he's labeled the mainstream human rights and international legal community as being guilty of genocide.
Well, and another interesting part, and Brad, if you could get ready, the tweet that I have, it's under posts. So it's right after the video clips. It says post and there's a post. It's a tweet. So another interesting thing is that he cites the definition of genocide. He says, the word genocide entered our lexicon, in fact, because a Polish Jewish jurist named Raphael Lemkin coined it to describe the crimes of the Holocaust. For those of us whose relations perished in the Holocaust, hearing Israel and Jewish supporters of Israel being accused of genocide is vicious. Okay, So he cites Lemkin, right? Because he did certainly come up with that term. But unfortunately for Chuck, Brad, is that tweet ready? Unfortunately for Chucky, the Lemkin Institute would beg to differ with Chuck's assessment of genocide. Here's just one of the examples, because they've called it a genocide many times. The Lemkin Institute condemns Israel, Europe, Canada, and the USA for perpetrating genocide in Gaza. It is a moral wrong that should haunt these countries for eternity.
I forgot that. I forgot. Yeah.
And let me keep reading it. It's a, yeah, that's it. That's it. Because I think the other thing may not be from them and maybe from another organization. But yeah, that's all. That's kind of all you need. And that's only one of the times that they've done that. But also, you know, it's funny because you mentioned how Anne Frank was seen as a story of human suffering. And what we see here is the exact opposite of that. You and I have talked about this. In fact, we talked about it shortly after October 7th, that this kind of war between these two factions of never again. And one faction of never again is saying never again for anyone. That's the values that I grew up with. And the other faction is saying never again for Jews. And in the name of that, we can kill whoever we want. And it's totally justified. I mean, the killing of the medical workers is so incredibly disgusting. The execution of these rescue workers is so disgusting. But what's even in some ways, I mean, it's not more disturbing, but another disturbing element is to watch people actually defend it. I mean, it's such a monstrosity.
Well, as I said, in politics or history, you're supposed to look for continuity and change. And I remember I documented it in one of my books. It's routine to target ambulances and medical workers. There were scenes, you know, they kind of left an imprint on my mind of when Israel would bomb a building, the survivors would come out on the street. They would then call for an ambulance. The ambulance would come. The Israeli gunships would wait. And when the ambulances came, they targeted the ambulances. They waited, knowing that the survivors would call for medical relief. And when the ambulances arrived, they targeted the ambulances. So, no, I agree with you. You reach a point now where you're sort of holocausted out.
Right.
You just can't keep up with the horrors that unfold on a daily basis. And in the midst of that, for Senator Schumer to write the book, it's not, you can't even figure out, is it desperation because he needs the money from his donors, or is it just a moral disgrace? And, you know, those sorts of things, they're alloys. You can't really separate. I don't believe it's possible to see a primary and a secondary motive. You know, the human capacity for self-deception is bottomless. So once he recognizes the necessity of writing the book to regain his donors, to recuperate from his March speech, then you start believing what you have to believe in order to do it. And whether there's a substratum of him that actually always believed it, probably, because there was an element of such shoddiness to what he was writing, invoking the song Exodus, like he was back at his bar mitzvah, or at the end of the book, quoting the shrewd political insight of Bill Maher. Bill Maher, you're now quoting? Not good.
I heard you call him the Pillsbury Doughboy and horn rim glasses, I believe, on Brianna Joy Gray's show.
Somebody wrote the Pillsbury Doughboy. No, he looks like the Pillsbury Doughboy. You can easily imagine him with the white powder in his face, with horn-rimmed glasses.
Yeah. But, even though this is kind of a visceral thing, it's not a moral difference to bomb hospital workers, obviously. And I believe you and I have talked about this before. And, many people pointed out that, people who are so concerned with beheaded babies, I mean, countless Palestinian babies in Gaza have been beheaded. But there was perhaps something
not just beheaded,
shredded.
Their body parts are splattered all over the place.
Right.
And parents walk around collecting the body parts in plastic bags.
Yeah. I mean, I just bring that example up because of the lie of the beheaded baby lie. But of course, yes, what you say is of course true. And you see the bodies being thrown up in the air. But I guess there's something different in some way, and maybe it is just on a visceral level, but between bombing and like executing in person one by one medical workers. Again, it's not better or worse, but I find it more.
I'm going to speak to you honestly, Katie. I know you'll be surprised to hear this. I don't know what happened. I didn't read it. I didn't watch it. I heard about it, but I can't read it because it emotionally depletes me and puts me in a defeatist mode. And I know I have to continue, notwithstanding the apparent hopelessness of it all. So now when you tell me they were executed one by one, I wasn't even aware of that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you,
and one of them left a message to his mother on his phone and said, "Forgive me, mother, for, forgive me for, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like basically asking for forgiveness because he wanted to help people, basically saying, forgive me for wanting to help people because that's why I was killed."
Didn't hear it. I met, after I think Cass led, I think so, it's after Cass led, but don't quote, I'm not sure. I met with some of the medical workers who went out knowing that they would be targeted and in Gaza. And I remember in particular a mother and her daughter who used to go out in the ambulances and the medical relief cars, and the quiet bravery and courage. They don't wear it on the lapel. They don't wear their sorrows on their lapel, and they don't wear their courage on the lapel. Very low key, always carrying themselves, acquitting themselves with dignity. I will tell you, of all the things I've read, the thing that gets me the most is during the Great March of Return in beginning March 30th, 2018, because it was overwhelmingly nonviolent, was festive. People camped out, they brought tents, there was circus performances. And this was, for your listeners, it was an attempt, among other things, to break the siege of Gaza by nonviolently walking to the perimeter fence that caged them in. And when you read the accounts by authoritative sources, the International Commission of Inquiry, Israel lined up along the perimeter fence its best snipers. And they later boasted that every bullet hit its mark. That's what they said. Every bullet landed where we wanted it to land. And who did they target? Well, according to the Independent Commission of Inquiry, They targeted children. They targeted medics. They targeted journalists. They targeted people with physical disabilities like double amputees. And these people were between 1 and 300 meters away from the perimeter fence. Most of them were just spectators leaning against a tree, opening up a picnic basket. And you can't help but wonder, what goes through the heads of these snipers? But now Israel has turned into, I know it's not politically correct to say it, it's turned into a nation, if not of murderers, then of war criminals. Because Israel's is not a non-representative army. It's a citizen army. During the war in Vietnam, those who opposed it, when atrocities occurred, which they did on a daily basis, and occasionally an atrocity actually got media attention. So if you take the best known, though not the worst, not the most egregious, but the best known atrocity was, of course, the My Lai massacre. And it was carried out by a fellow named, or among those responsible, was a fellow known as Lieutenant Calley. Now, for those of us in the anti-war movement, and I'm not unique, it was probably about half the country was involved. The numbers grew as the horrors unfolded. We never saw ourselves as implicated in what Lieutenant Calley did, because in our minds, he was white trash from somewhere in the South. That's how we assimilated Lieutenant Calley. There were them and there was us. But in the case of Israel, you can't do that.
Right.
It's a representative army. It's a citizen army. Either you're carrying out the execution, the genocide, or your son is carrying out the genocide,
Or daughter.
or your daughter is carrying out the genocide, or your father is carrying out the genocide, or your brother is carrying out the genocide. And there's no question or quarrel that were they, the relatives, in the shoes of those who are carrying out the genocide, they wouldn't be carrying it out reluctantly. That is factually untrue. They are carrying it out joyfully, euphorically, enthusiastically. They're posting the horrors committed by them all over the social media, in the knowledge that they're not going to be ostracized for posting what they're doing. Their pop singers compose songs like "May Gaza Burn," "May Gaza Burn." So it can't be said that it can be said that Israel has metamorphosed. Maybe there were elements of it in the past, and surely ideologically the seeds had been planted a very long time ago, probably at its founding. Not unlike, just today I was going through my money. I had to go shopping, and I was looking at the $20 bill. And every time I look at the $20 bill, and there's Andrew Jackson. And I remember reading this book called American Holocaust. It was written in 1992, the Columbus Centenary. And 500 years. No, quincentenary, 500 years. The Columbus quincentenary. And Andrew Jackson used to make whips from the skin of Native Americans. Yeah, that image never left my mind, even though we're talking about 40 years ago, I read it, something like that, who knows. So I'm not saying this is alien to our country's history, but that being said,
It's different because of the way the army functions.
Well, in our country, it was actually pretty representative. Fighting the Indian Wars was not confined to one small group of people.
Right. Sorry, I was thinking about today. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But what I would say is, there's this whole controversy that was at Columbia University when Professor Frank said that she's concerned about these Israeli soldiers coming on campus right after coming out of Gaza.
Right. And then she was basically forced to retire, right?
Yeah.
Forced to resign. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, and so she got hit very hard for that. And she kind of retreated a little, not important. I thought, yes, they are genocidal murderers. And one should be wary of them. And they certainly should, or at any rate, it's perfectly legitimate to ostracize them.
Yeah.
How would I feel? How would I feel if during the Nazi Holocaust, there were some Germans who had served on the front who then were attending my university? How would I feel? Would I welcome them? Hey, let's go to the frat party. No, that's not going to happen.
Well, they also had another reason she mentioned that, was because there was a chemical attack perpetrated by one of these IDF people. Yeah, allegedly. Yeah.
That was one of the reasons she expressed her concern.
Right.
But as a general rule, not as a general principle, in this particular case, it's certainly warranted to be not just skeptical, but I don't see it as being either incorrect to, as it were, and I know this is a strong statement, but I'll say it and you can disagree. They're guilty until proven innocent. You served in Gaza. You served in Gaza. You were part of the genocide machine. You served in Gaza. And that being said, I think it is perfectly legitimate to ostracize them.
Yeah.
You want a welcome wagon? It's not coming from me. That's not going to happen. I think at that note, it's 9:00 and I have to prepare a class.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Norman, as always, for joining. It's been such a great conversation. And I totally agree with what you said. I think that guilty until proven innocent. Sadly, I think that most Israel, I mean, it's not PC to say this because we like to distinguish between governments and people, but given what is the percentage? What is the percentage of people who are critical of what's happening? There's people critical of Netanyahu, but not critical of what the percentage of people critical of Netanyahu for doing what he's doing.
We know the percentage. Since October 7th, the figure has hovered at about 5% think Israel is using too much force in Gaza. And of the other 95%, 40% believe Israel's using too little force in Gaza. And as Chuck Schumer himself wrote, 60% of American Jews think Israel is fighting the war the correct way. Well, if that's what you feel, then don't be surprised if there's a lot of animus directed at Jews when the majority believe that Israel's conduct in Gaza is correct.
Not young ones, not young Jews. We got to give them credit. Not the majority of young Jews, yeah.
Well, that's my last point.
Oh, yeah.
If you were serious about animus directed at Jews, if you were serious about that, then what you would have done in the book is point out that the first major demonstration against what was happening in Gaza was that wonderful event at Grand Central Station, sponsored by young Jewish people.
Right. Jewish Voice for Peace.
There was, I think it was not in our name and Jewish Voice. Yeah. I think it was both, if my memory is correct.
If not now, and Jewish Voice for Peace. Yeah.
If not now, and Jewish Voice for Peace. There was the magnificent display of solidarity at the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah, that was JVP. Yeah.
The same Jewish organizations, one or two, I'm not sure. If you were serious, you would note that at the encampments, there were large Jewish contingents and there were seders celebrated together between Jews and non-Jews. But that whole aspect is effaced in Schumer's book, as he just dismisses it as a small handful of Jews, crazies. A handful, he hasn't used the word, but that's the implication. Right. Crazies oppose what Israel's doing in a, not just in measured terms, but in a brave, committed, dignified way, surely deserving of admiration and respect. But that doesn't exist. I'll mention one last note. Bernie Sanders, who has spoken out and is Jewish, is absent in the book, but I mention it for another reason. He talks about this rise in anti-Semitism. Yes, well, he dates it, as you recall, from 9/11, which is 2001, and then the great crash in 2008. But here's the deal, as Bernie Sanders would like to say. He ran for president in 2016 and 2020. If you look at the demographic breakdown, he won every demographic: Blacks, Latinos, whites, Jews. He won every demographic under 40, either under 30 or under 40. I can't now recall. In any event, you say the horror begins with either 9/11 or the crash. But if that's true, why was this septuagenarian Jew from Brooklyn? Almost certainly, he would have been president of the United States, were it not for the machinations of the Democratic Party leadership, including him. If there was this explosion of anti-Semitism in the clip that you played, my recollection is he dated it from 2000. He said around 2000. If that were the case, in the book, as I say, he dates it from 9/11 and then the crash in 2008. If that were the case, why was the U.S., the American people, on the cusp of electing a Jew from Brooklyn with a thick Brooklyn Jewish accent, unmistakably Jewish, and a radical by, contemporary. Why were they on the verge of electing him president? How did that come to pass? How did that come to pass? Unless this whole spiel about an exploding anti-Semitism is a complete fabrication.
Well, that's an excellent point to wrap up with. So thank you, Norman, as always, and excited to see what you come up with next, because you're always doing amazing work.
I do my best, which is the best that I can do. That's my credo.
Great. Have a great night.
Thank you, Miss Katie, and thank you, Brett, and thank you for everyone else who assisted in the program.
Thank you so much. And that would be Nate and Andrew, and Phantom Esfanta for the clip. Now we are going to play an interview that I did with Whitney Webb. You're not going to want to go anywhere, because Whitney Webb is really fascinating. And in this clip, we talk about P. Diddy and Jeffrey Epstein. And yeah, just watch it. It's going to be great. And then at the very end, I'll say goodbye, and I'll probably show a clip or two related to this discussion. And I will also read the super chat. So I will see you guys in right after the Whitney interview. Okay, so without any further ado, Whitney Webb. Excited to be joined by Whitney Webb, the journalist. She is a contributing editor to Unlimited Hangout. She's also the author of One Nation Under Blackmail. Welcome, Whitney.
Hey, Katie. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, we are really happy to have you on. And as I've said, the people have been demanding you as a guest. So very happy we can make this happen. You have a new article about P. Diddy, about Sean Diddy Combs. And, you don't usually write about kind of celebrity culture. So I want to start off by asking you, and it's really fascinating, by the way, but I want to start off by asking you what made you want to write about this?
Yeah, so originally I was just going to write about one aspect of the Diddy case that I thought was interesting, which was his relationship with the supermodel Naomi Campbell, mainly because I had sort of gone down this avenue of research with respect to my work on Jeffrey Epstein that I hadn't published yet, involving her and Epstein. And so I thought it would be interesting to explore how she sort of intersects both worlds. But then, in doing that, kind of realized there were more intersections to be had, including the current president, among other figures, Ron Burkle being another one. So it seemed worth exploring at least that broader network. And, a lot of the people, oligarch figures that pop up in my book, the Bronfman family, for example, had an outsized influence on the record industry and on hip hop in the 1990s and beyond. And some of that intersects with other aspects of my Epstein research that I sort of explore with my co-author, CZ Means, at the end of, this first article. Hopefully it'll be a 3-part series, but, sometimes these things run a little long. We tend to do long form journalism at Unlimited Hangout anyway, so it might be more than 3, but some of my past stuff sort of on things that were going on in the 1990s in the world of covert ops, sort of linking some of this unusual activity in the hip hop industry with allegations made by Gary Webb in his Dark Alliance series, and some of this, what I wrote about in my book, One Nation Under Blackmail, about Epstein's apparent involvement in arms trafficking during the first Clinton administration, what his 17 visits to the Clinton White House were about, and, why he had assisted on behalf of his, main patron, Leslie Wexner, relocating the Southern Air Transport airline, which had previously been CIA owned and had been the main Iran-Contra airline that had been involved in drug and arms trafficking for the benefit of the the Contras in Nicaragua, how that was sort of repurposed in this period and sort of had teamed up with these corrupt actors in China's military industrial complex to basically flood urban America with illegal assault weapons, which is not really something that gets talked about a lot, but I've always thought is a pretty important piece of the puzzle in talking about, this alleged effort that's touched on here of sort of engineering a cultural shift for the purpose of, for the benefit of the private prison industry. And so there's an exploration of that as it relates to Diddy in this piece.
It's so funny because it's like, just, I don't know, in the minute response you gave, it's like you could make 5 books out of the various things that you mentioned.
Yeah, well, trying not to do that, but there are obviously references to my book. So, if you want to know more about some of the things I mentioned, there's references in the piece to keep it from being a book,
Right.
to the book I've already written that touches on some of these things. But,
I have it. I'm looking off to the side because I have it, but I don't know which room it's in. I have 2 bookshelves. So, but it's actually, how long is it?
Well, it's almost 1,000 pages because there's 2 of them.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's surprisingly or not surprisingly, given the subject matter, like it's pretty, it's not like it's a page turner. Lots of times, like I get a lot of books sent to people, which is great. And it's like, oh God, I have to catch up with this reading. And, if you're out there listening to this and I've asked you for a book, of course, I'm very grateful and I do read them. But it's nice that when you get a really long one, that it's actually very engaging. Because sometimes the stuff, it's disturbing, but it's so interesting that you just want to keep reading. So
sure. I thought it was interesting enough to research and write all that about it.
Yeah.
So I'm glad people feel that way about reading it as well. But basically, in a nutshell, the interest in the Diddy case was similar to my interest in the Epstein case initially, in that, the way the media narrative is about these cases is sort of, very focused on either Diddy or Epstein, and like they were the mastermind of all of this stuff. And these people never exist in a vacuum. They tend to have significant moneyed benefactors that somehow evade persecution or even investigation. That's very obvious in the Epstein case, but I think it's also pretty true as it relates to, the Diddy case as well. And he learned this behavior that he's now, in prison for and awaiting trial for from, various other figures that have somehow evaded the kind of charges that now face Diddy. And why is that? So the series is meant to sort of explore that, and also, how this broader, I guess, oligarch network that also has a lot of ties to the Epstein situation sort of pop up in the record industry with direct connections to Bad Boy Records and Bad Boy Entertainment, and some of these other business ventures of Sean Combs.
Right. And also, I'm not sure how much my audience follows this, but do you mind giving just this for people who don't? Can you give history of what he's being accused of, the state of the trial, and any relevant information you think it's important to know or understand? Sure.
So I'm not, the series probably isn't going to include stuff that would, sort of be more like court reporting. But as I understand it, he's already had aspects of the legal process have already advanced. And I think his trial is due to start in May. He stands accused of operating what's been called by AP, an empire of sex crimes, sex and human trafficking. A lot of similarities in the charges in some ways to the Epstein and also Ghislaine Maxwell cases. But what's interesting, though, is that, whereas with Epstein and Maxwell, it was sort of the FBI and SDNY leading, the Diddy case has had a lot of involvement from the Department of Homeland Security, which is kind of unusual, it seems.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting also as a native New Yorker, it was interesting to hear about the different places he had gone to school and lived and moved. And then we'll get it when we talk about Epstein. I don't know if you know what high school I went to, but guess what high school I went to?
Oh, the same one as him. Or where he taught.
Yeah, exactly. Dalton. And that's where Barr was and everything. I just realized, by the way, I was re-listening because your book is also great as an audiobook, but I was re-listening to it. It's just fun. There's even a virus, right? Epstein-Barr or Barr-Epstein virus.
Yeah, it's Epstein-Barr, but unrelated to the.
I know. It's just funny.
The Donald Bill Barr, and Epstein thing. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what are the? What is he being accused of? Your article not only kind of details his violent and abusive rise, but his mentors who helped him, who kind of molded him, such as Clive Davis and Russell Simmons. Can you tell us more about these figures and kind of, I guess, the network behind them?
Yeah. So Clive Davis in particular is the person that is really credited with allowing Bad Boy Records to be a success because, they really wanted to have been successful if they didn't enter into that very early distribution and promo deal with Clive Davis's Arista Records, when they were created. And this is also true of, his mentor, Andre Harrell at Uptown Records. Uptown Records wanted to have been successful if it wasn't for their distribution deal with MCA, for example, which is now Universal Studios. I think the same is true for Russell Simmons' label Def Jam, but I think in their case it was CBS Records, which is also related to sort of the Clive Davis story. Clive Davis was, at sort of the at a major post within the CBS recording subsidiaries. He got involved in this major payola scandal, which is basically generally payola is when there's bribery to get, singles of a particular artist or a particular label played more on certain stations, which is illegal. But in the case of Clive Davis, it was payola basically tied to a heroin ring. And his top assistant, his main aide, was known for sort of being a fixer at the label and supplying, these stations they were, allegedly bribing, and also just other people, artists, under the label and whatever, with drugs, with prostitutes, with all sorts of things. Clive Davis arguably evaded charges for that. He got let go of CBS. Why it was kind of hot. The investigation, arguably because they didn't want any of the scandal beyond the payola aspect to come back and bite the company in the butt, basically. And it was that heroin ring, by the way, was tied to organized crime interests. Mainly, I believe the Genovese crime family, which had kind of a long and storied history in the music industry through Roulette Records and figures like Morris Levy, who, for example, funded the first hip hop label, Sugar Hill. And so, there's basically been this organized crime effort to dominate those particular labels for some time. And Davis stands accused of people that were once close to, Combs and later became rivals, like Suge Knight, and also his former bodyguard Gene Deal, of sort of training Diddy in this using drugs and sex to control people. Right. And also allegedly Russell Simmons of Def Jam engaged in that same type of behavior and sort of mentored Diddy in that, because Russell Simmons was obviously important, not just for Diddy, but also for Andre Harrell at Uptown Records. And that's how, Diddy, Sean Combs, first entered the music industry. And Russell Simmons is interesting for a few reasons. One of the reasons I point out that it hasn't really gotten a lot of coverage is his very early connection in the 1990s. Obviously, Def Jam was successful by then. He became very involved with this guy who later became a famous Hollywood director named Brett Ratner, who, along with Simmons, has been accused of committing sex crimes. And so now Simmons is in Indonesia evading charges, and Ratner immigrated to Israel to avoid lawsuits related to sex assault. They're both accused separately and accused of engaging in that type of activity together. And Ratner's kind of an interesting figure, at least in recent years, because he teamed up with Steve Mnuchin's Hollywood studio to create, through his company he created with the Australian billionaire James Packer, Rat Pack Entertainment. James Packer is a major focus of the Netanyahu corruption trial currently. A lot of that is, kind of mentioned in the piece, but there's a lot there to pick on. And Ratner was basically offered the opportunity to immigrate to Israel, apparently by Netanyahu, because a week before he did so, he was Netanyahu's guest of honor at the UN alongside Alan Dershowitz, the former Epstein defense lawyer. So quite an interesting array of special guests to have at your UN speech. And Ratner and Packer were actually recently at Mar-a-Lago dining with Musk and Trump. And apparently Ratner is trying to make his Hollywood comeback after being banished basically because of all the litany of sex assault claims against him. He's directing the new Melania Trump documentary that's supposed to air on Amazon at the end of the year, on which Melania is an executive producer. So
that'll be really objective.
Yeah, and then oddly, around the same time, James Packer buys this property neighboring Mar-a-Lago in Florida that had previously been reserved for like the Secret Service and close friends of the Trump family. So interesting that a major figure in the Netanyahu corruption trial, who became Netanyahu's neighbor, and that's part of what the charge is about, is now kind of repeating the same thing. And one of the reasons I think Brett Ratner is really interesting and his team up with Russell Simmons is interesting is because Brett Ratner is very much involved with sort of the heir to Mayor Lansky, Al Malnick, who's this Miami businessman who's basically credited, by mainstream media too, as inventing this way for Lansky and sort of other mobster bank figures like Tibor Rosenbaum, developing these ways to sort of launder money for organized crime from illicit into legitimate ventures, and created these banks in the Bahamas and all of that to do so. And Ratner is their adopted son and adopted father. They're like very, very, very close. They have a lot of weird ties also, the two of them, to Michael Jackson's final years. And according to Jackson, an attempt to sort of take away his stake in the Beatles music catalog, and a lot of really weird industry stuff there. But basically the ties to organized crime are pretty extensive. Brett Ratner claims to have been walked home from school and middle school personally by Lansky. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, but that's his claim, and his ties to Al Malnick are kind of significant. So, in looking at a lot of these figures, there seem to be a lot of organized crime ties. And honestly, and I try and make this pretty clear in my book as well, organized crime, despite the public perception that's been developed, did not magically disappear in the 60s and the 70s and 80s. Arguably, it went in, the organized crime figures rebranded as philanthropists and as multinational corporations and as oligarchs. And because of the system that was developed allegedly by Malnick, but also others, they're able to sort of launder money from illicit into these legitimate ventures. And so that illicit money pumps up these legitimate ventures and allows them to become hugely successful and dominate their respective industries, among other things, or buy out competitors and consolidate. And because of, a lot of the legislation that was passed in the Reagan, Bush, and Clinton eras, and so on, industry consolidation was allowed to progress to points that were previously unthinkable in the United States, creating, basically quasi semi-monopolies in a lot of our industries to the benefit of a relatively small clique of oligarchs who dominate the country now.
A question that you have about, and that's all like fascinating and kind of overwhelming because the connections are so unending. But about Harold, you forewarn of an important point that caught my attention. You write, mob-linked entertainment companies, in this case Warner Brothers, financing the glorification of drug dealing around 1991. So can you elaborate on this for us? And is there a pattern, do you think, of drug glorification by mob-linked media?
So basically what the piece argues is that a lot of the biggest media companies that were doing this, sort of have a lot of connections to the same organized crime and really intelligence linked network. And this is typified by MCA, but also Warner Brothers is very involved. So as I noted in the piece, the longtime head of Warner Brothers, Steve Ross, built up his company that later acquired Warner Brothers when it was struggling with, Abner Zwillman and some other figures of, New York organized crime. And, and around the time, all of this was going on, he was on Robert Maxwell's yacht, and he was yucking it up with a lot of other organized crime intelligence linked figures, of which Maxwell was one. But of course, MCA is probably the most notorious in this regard as well. Lou Wasserman, for example, their most famous and storied executive, very intimately connected to mobsters like Mo Dalitz and Sam Cohen. The Department of Justice was investigating MCA for its organized crime ties, but because MCA was so essential to the political rise of Ronald Reagan, the Reagan administration quashed the DOJ investigation into MCA's ties to organized crime, which are very extensive. And also MCA had considerable ties to the CIA, which the CIA still refuses to release any information on at all, even that going back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And what's interesting here, and what I sort of note in the piece, is that there's allegations from a couple sources that beginning in 1991, there were efforts within the music industry to culturally engineer hip hop to promote violence for the purpose of benefiting private prison corporations. And some of those allegations have been poo-pooed over the years because of a difficulty in finding a direct connection between the music industry and the private prison companies. But MCA was involved in a covert operation called the Promise, that's remembered today as the Promise software scandal during the Reagan administration, that involved organized crime as well, not just intelligence and CIA and Israeli intelligence connections. And one of the main companies that was part of that, along with MCA, was Wackenhut. And so Wackenhut is now the Geo Group, which is the second biggest private prison company. And it was at the time, all of this was allegedly happening in the early 1990s. So there is absolutely important connections there that really should be explored. And one of the allegations by people that have made this claim in the past about this move by record companies specifically is that there were, these private prison companies were going to wait for hip hop to be culturally engineered in the more violent direction before launching IPOs. And Wackenhut's division that ran its private prisons, WCC, waited until the passage of the 1994 Clinton crime bill to have its IPO, oddly enough. And Clinton, as well as Reagan, have very extensive ties to the Wasserman family. Arguably Clinton, just as much arguably as Reagan. In the case of Reagan, MCA engineered his rise as a political figure, but the Wassermans were intimately involved with Clinton, including at the time he was governor of Arkansas, and also in, both of his presidential campaigns, major contributors, and also became one of the main donors to the Clinton Foundation, became very involved with Lou Wasserman's heir of choice and grandson, Casey Wasserman, who is now actually in charge of rebuilding Los Angeles after the fires and their Olympic committee for the 2028 Olympics. Wow. Casey Wasserman. He was also on Epstein's plane quite a bit.
Wow. That's insane.
It's complicated. And when you add the allegations that this same network, of which, the Promise software scandal, arguably part of the Iran-Contra nexus, Gary Webb argues those same people in the 1990s were facilitating the explosion of the crack cocaine epidemic in urban communities. And then other figures from the same nexus, as I mentioned earlier, were using these weird connections that sort of bubbled up in the 1996 presidential election that were investigated by Congress. That's remembered as Chinagate, but it's really this Iran-Contra crowd gun running again. They were facilitating the passage of all these, smuggling of all these illicit weapons that had been banned in the U.S. From China, mainly assault weapons like AK-47, into these same communities. So you have an effort to culturally engineer through hip hop. You have gun trafficking and you have drug trafficking, all really targeting the same communities, allegedly for the benefit of private prisons. And it really hasn't been, explored that much at all. But I think a lot of people, these are scandals that have popped up on and off over the years. The Promise scandal was kind of memory hold in 1991, covered up alongside the related scandals of BCCI and Iran-Contra by William Barr when he was Attorney General the first time. And obviously Gary Webb stuff hasn't gotten attention since the late 90s, really or early 2000s. He died in 2004. And since then, obviously, only people that sort of look into that era recall those, his reporting and those allegations. And arguably the Chinagate investigation, is now remembered as a campaign finance scandal, sort of like how Iran-Contra is remembered as a hostage scandal, when really it was significantly more than that. And so there's been a lot of efforts to control the narrative about what was going on in the 1990s. So it seems like, Combs in particular was backed by this network and Bad Boy Entertainment, as well as their rivals on the West Coast, Death Row Records, as we note in the piece, seem to have been connected to these networks for the cultural engineering effort of this apparently broader op.
You just mentioned, obviously, the death of Gary Webb. For people who don't know, Gary Webb was a journalist who covered lots of the things that you just mentioned. Can you talk about his death?
So there's people that say he didn't kill himself, and there's people that say he did. And as I understand it, his family thinks that he did kill himself, but argue that his life had been destroyed by this smear campaign against him and his reporting. It's sort of similar in a sense to claims about Aaron Swartz's death, who, people argue, oh, did he really kill himself? And then his family says, well, he did, but really the US government killed him because of the extreme prosecution and smearing and all of that stuff that targeted him. So, with Gary Webb, it could really go either of the two ways. And honestly, I think his reporting was really important, but I think absolutely the efforts to attack him and his reporting did contribute to his death. I think there's no argument to be made there other than that. But, whether he pulled the trigger or not, I honestly haven't really looked into that particular aspect of it enough. But I think his reporting was really consequential. And I think he was proven right after he, unfortunately, he didn't live to see himself proven right.
Right.
But, pretty dicey allegations that were made at the time against a very powerful group, obviously the CIA, and their involvement, obviously, in drug trafficking is a fact. I mean, the CIA has been drug running for a very, 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 very long time. But, the reason it was so contentious was because they were drug trafficking and targeting American communities. It wasn't really as contentious when they're, accused of doing it abroad so much.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so I had heard things about the suspicious way that he had killed himself, but
I read about it years ago, but unfortunately I'm not super familiar anymore. But I'm sure it's worth exploring. I mean, there certainly are suicides that happen that are arguably not those things.
Right.
For example, Mark Middleton, the person that was essential to this Chinagate scandal that I mentioned earlier, who was Epstein's main contact at his 17 Clinton White House meetings, ended up, he hung himself and also shot himself in the mouth with a shotgun after the Epstein scandal and the White House visits sort of started to be reported on. Obviously, not much has come of that since it was initially reported on, but it seems like that would be difficult to do. So, there are things that, and even Epstein's own death, obviously there's a lot of people that have questions about that. And, there's no shortage of historical examples of other suicides that don't really necessarily fit that. So it's definitely fair, I think, for people to question. But again, the family says one thing, other people say other things. And it's been years since I've looked into the particular circumstances of his death. But again, he was targeted, obviously, because of he was reporting a big story and didn't back away from it. And it obviously contributed to his death, whether you think the death was suspicious or not.
Right. And just Aaron Swartz, for people who don't know, was the kind of hacktivist, internet hacktivist, computer programmer, political organizer. And his crime, quote unquote, in case you're listening to this, I'm putting it in quotes, air quotes, he was arrested by MIT police on state breaking and entering charges after connecting a computer to the MIT network in an unmarked and unlocked closet and setting it to download academic journal articles from JSTOR. Yeah. And he was charged with 2 counts of wire fraud, 11 violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, carrying a cumulative maximum penalty of $1 million in fines, 35 years in prison.
Yeah, it was insane.
Yeah, it was really insane. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, unbelievably tragic. And I actually, I don't know if you saw the movie, but I thought it was pretty good. Kill the Messenger.
Yeah.
About Gary Webb. Yeah. It's a good, it's a feature. It's not a documentary, but with
No,
Jeremy Renner.
it's a movie. Some aspects, I believe, are dramatized, but it's, for
Right.
people that aren't really, would rather learn about the scandal through a dramatized movie. I mean, it's as good as any in that realm. Mm-hmm.
And going back to the Diddy story, can you talk about the overlap that you see between the worlds of Epstein and Diddy?
Yeah. So basically, the particular network that I'm writing about as it relates, in the Diddy scandal to, the entertainment industry, or the segment that really tried to dominate hip hop, is very similar to that which I argue was connected to Epstein. So there's this group that was formed in 1991 by Leslie Wexner, who, of course, is Jeffrey Epstein's main patron from 1985 until 2008, just intimately connected. You can't really tell where one ended and one began, especially after Epstein got power of attorney over pretty much all of Wexner's affairs in the very early 1990s. But anyway, this group was created by him and Charles Bronfman in 1991. It wasn't reported on until like 7 or 8 years later by the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal referred to it as the study group, or the mega group. And basically what you have is this group of billionaires who pretty much all have ties to the Likud party in Israel, and also in their own family histories. Most of the known members that are named in that Wall Street Journal article have some sort of tie to organized crime. So that, of course, includes the Bronfmans. That would include Wexner. And if, the only member that I didn't write about having organized crime ties, because I didn't know it at the time in my book, was Lawrence Tisch. But I found things since then, which are included in this article. So it's very interesting that you would have all of these figures sort of come together. They all seem to share organized crime ties. Some of them have intelligence affiliations. In the case of Tisch, he had served in intelligence at one point. In the case of the entertainment industry, Tisch owned CBS, which, controls Columbia Records and CBS Records and lots of other subsidiaries. The Bronfmans took over MCA. They took over Warner Brothers. They took over Def Jam. They took over Polygram, Interscope Records, just an insane amount of entities in the entertainment and music industry specifically, and had a lot of ties to this, particular nexus that we were talking about earlier. And so obviously in the Epstein case, I wrote a whole book about how, well, not exclusively about them, but how these figures seem to have a lot of connections to Epstein world as well, not just Wexner either. In the case of the Bronfmans, allegedly, it was a Bronfman insider trading scandal that led to Epstein being fired from Bear Stearns in the early 1980s. At which point he apparently begins interacting with intelligence, arguably because the counsel of Bear Stearns, just a few months before Epstein was fired, was Bill Casey, who had just become CIA director around that time for Reagan. And then this is when Epstein begins hiding and finding money for powerful people and, allegedly criminals, people like Adnan Khashoggi, who were intelligence connected arms dealers. And all of these figures in the 1980s, allegations of him arms trafficking with figures like Douglas Lease being involved in some of the Iran-Contra era arms trafficking, becoming involved with Israeli intelligence, being connected with Robert Maxwell. All of that is alleged to have happened with Epstein in the 1980s or so, also overlapping with when he sort of enters Leslie Wexner's inner circle, which is also interesting in and of itself, because Leslie Wexner was, according to Columbus police, well, in this document they heavily tried to suppress, but it's there. They suspected Wexner of involvement in the alleged mob-style murder of his tax attorney just days before his tax attorney was going to testify to the IRS. And also in that document, it basically details Wexner's ties to Genovese crime family interests. And so a lot of the crime family interests that pop up in the Epstein scandal, and also here in this at least first installment of this investigation into Diddy, tend to be the Genovese crime family and the Gambino crime family. And actually, Sean Combs's father was apparently, a heroin trafficker tied to Gambino crime interests, allegedly also a federal informant. Diddy's been accused of being a federal informant. It's very possible Epstein was one as well, and somehow evaded charges for numerous things and got sweetheart deals because of his, alleged informing. Well, I think it's now admitted, deal as an informer. And there's a couple things throughout Combs's life, and beginning with the stampede. He was allegedly responsible in 1991. Charges for having guns at nightclubs, assault charges, things like that he supposedly wiggled out of and shouldn't have been able to. That could have been explained by some sort of, relationship like that. And generally, as I, look through my book, a lot of these historical examples of people that threw parties and filmed everything for the purpose of sex blackmail, something that, that Diddy's also accused of, there tends to be some sort of information sharing relationship with, law enforcement or intelligence agencies. It just tends to happen.
Right. And by the way, Adnan Khashoggi is the uncle who you mentioned. He's the uncle of Jamal Khashoggi.
Jamal Khashoggi.
Yeah, right. I was actually shocked that CBS reported this. It's an article from 2020, and it's called "How Jewish American Pedophiles Hide from Justice in Israel." I wonder if they got pushback from that, because you can just imagine how people would, accuse CBS of being anti-Semitic for this, et cetera, given that they do this over like things that have nothing to do with Jews and are just about Zionism.
Sure.
It talks about how Israel's acted as a safe haven for Jewish pedophiles and rapists around the world. And obviously, just to be clear, non-Jews are also rapists and pedophiles, in case there are any anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists out there. It acts as a safe haven for Jewish pedophiles and rapists around the world, from the U.S. to Australia. You mentioned above Brett Ratner, and you report on how he, after being accused of rape and sexual misconduct by 10 women, fled to Israel for protection from prosecution, where you report he may be plotting a comeback to America under Trump. So what are the connections that you found between Epstein and Israel? And do you feel that Israel, and why has Israel acted, if you agree, why has Israel acted as a safe harbor for these serial rapists and abusers? And that is my a piece of my interview with Whitney Webb. And you'll be able to access much more of that interview on patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. We have a surprise additional guest. I'll get to that shortly, but I'm going to do two things right now. First, I'm going to read some super chats. Then we're going to play the pretty disturbing video that I mentioned to Norman. Well, I didn't mention the video. I mentioned the event of the execution of the rescue workers. Obviously, the video is not of the execution, but it's a really important video that comes, of all places, from Fox News. This guy, Trey Yingst, has really been doing relatively good stuff on Israel, surprisingly. So we're going to watch that. And then we're going to be joined by a journalist who was at some recent pro-Palestine rallies in New York City, protests, and caught some very interesting footage. And she's going to talk to us about the fact that a pro-Israel person threw feces on a pro-Palestine protest, and you'll never believe what the police did about it. Spoiler alert, not a lot. So let's start off with actually, she's here now. Ashley, are you ready? Because I was just telling people we were going to do other stuff, but I'm happy to bring you on if you're ready now. We can't hear you. Give me a thumbs up if you're ready. Okay, great. Wow. Okay. So actually, that thing I was just telling you about the protest, we're going to talk about that first. Thank you so much, Ashley, for coming on so quickly. Hi, Ashley. Welcome to the Katie
Hi.
Halper Show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And this is Ashley Bishop. And Ashley Bishop is a reporter with Status Coup. This is her first week with Status Coup. People know Status Coup. We've had on Jordan Sheridan, the founder. We've had on John Farina, who does video for them, for you guys. And so Ashley is a reporter with Status Coup and documentary filmmaker whose previous reporting has been featured in The Nation, Real News, Jacobin, among other places. She's also reported on the ground in Ecuador, helping to produce Circus Ecuador, a documentary that exposed NGO and nonprofit corruption in Ecuador. So welcome, Ashley. Thanks again for joining.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thank you so much for the nice little welcome.
Of course. So we have some disturbing footage from a protest, I believe. Did the protest with the bucket that was thrown, is that from today or from yesterday?
That was from yesterday. That was
Okay, so it's all from yesterday. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so we have a couple of clips from a protest that you attended and that you covered. So can you tell us about what this protest was, what you observed, and then we can show the videos that you guys tweeted out, and we'll wind up showing at the very end the insane clip.
Yeah, sure. So this was the Global Strike for Gaza rally. So it was actually a pretty small protest at first. There weren't that many people there. There was one speaker. And yeah, it was for Gaza. And so the protest didn't really grow until they started marching toward the Israeli embassy. So once the march got going and was headed down toward 2nd Avenue, that's when there was like a heavy police presence and all that stuff. And things just kind of got out of control pretty quickly.
Okay, great. So, I mean, that part isn't great. That's great that you're here to talk about it with us. So, I guess let's see. I think the first clip that we want to show, we have the police upset about the flag. We have, which ones are these? Sorry, let me just open up your Twitter. And again, thank you so much. This is last minute, so we're very excited. Okay, let's see. We have. I'll do it in order, I guess. Let's do an order. So first, we have a clip of a police officer, right, trying to steal several banners from protesters, and this is at Grand Central Station, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So the protest did eventually make it into Grand Central Terminal, and then that's what you're seeing. There was a bunch of protesters, at the top of the stairs. Who had tried to hang some banners down, and NYPD was not happy about that.
Okay, so let's take a look.
And NYPD is trying to usher protesters down the steps. It does not appear to be working right now. NYPD is trying to remove banners from protesters. I'm not sure what good that does when there are so many protesters in here. And protesters are chanting right now, the more you try to silence us, the louder we will be. Again, cops are ripping banners away from protesters who are already in here.
And they're screaming Gaza, right? They're chanting Gaza. It took me a bit to realize that.
If you're just joining us on this live stream right now, John Farina and I are on the ground covering the Global Strike for Gaza March, which is...
And that looks like, is that a counter protester right there in the hat?
Yeah, so there were a few of them. When the rally just first got started, there were a bunch of, Zionist counter protesters trying to kind of antagonize people who were there. And then when we got into Grand Central, there were a bunch of bystanders who, were also yelling at the protesters. So it's kind of, I don't know if that guy was part of the Zionist group that had kind of maybe followed us in, or if he was just someone who was in Grand Central and decided that he was not happy with what was going on.
Right. He could have, to be fair, there are some people who just get annoyed. I've seen that happen. But
yeah.
The ground covering the global strike for Gaza march, which has now entered Grand Central Station in New York City. And so far, 3 arrests, as far as we know, have been made of protesters.
And so how many people were in the terminal, more or less?
I'm not totally sure. John and I think both are not great at estimating crowd sizes.
Terrible at that, yeah.
It's hard, and I'm very short, so I can't always see. I'm going to say there were hundreds of people.
Okay.
There were hundreds of people.
Okay.
Probably 200 to 300 people, if I had to make a guess.
Great. So what were people arrested for?
So there were 3 protesters that were arrested. Not for trespassing. I think just for, kind of being around when things started to get a little bit rowdy, let's say, because I didn't see any of the 2 protesters that were initially arrested. I didn't see them doing anything beforehand. And I think you can see in some of the videos, I think you're going to play the first girl that I saw get arrested. She was, a tiny young girl. I didn't see her doing anything. She was just kind of there.
Right, of course. So they had to do something. Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look at this next clip, which shows pro-Israel Zionists attacking a pro-Palestinian protester.
Looks like someone is dropping ice or water or something from their balcony.
So that's a guy with the Israeli flag. Okay.
Yeah, I actually did not see that on the ground. I didn't see that until, these videos came out yesterday.
Okay, so this is not your video, but did you witness this?
I did not see that particular thing hitting the car.
Right.
So when I was looking, to me, I looked up and went, "Oh, what are people throwing? It looks like a bunch of ice or something, or like someone had a drink and threw it off a balcony." I saw that. I saw some like nondescript garbage being thrown at people. This we didn't notice until the videos that came out after.
Right.
So.
All right, so here's apparently feces and bleach were identified as thrown from the apartment. Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously they're encouraging the police to go up because they saw the person who threw the feces and bleach down. Okay.
Yeah.
And at this point, I don't think people knew what it was, right? They just knew that there were things that someone was throwing objects from a balcony.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think everyone had just assumed it was water up until, John and I started hearing, actually, no, it was bleach. So I'm kind of surprised nobody got like really seriously injured by that. I know I got hit a little bit, but not much. So
you got hit by what?
Just the water or, the bleach, what ended up being bleach.
Wow.
Bro, y'all come on. Let's go.
Okay, so that is the bag of feces?
I guess so.
Okay,
yes,
and it
got
hit
a great close up.
Yeah, and it hit the windshield. Okay. Car.
Above the Summit, New York building, apartment buildings, I believe. Yeah, they're dropping garbage on top of protesters.
Come down, you fucking asshole! Come down, you coward! Come down, you coward! Come down! Oh, they be doing that.
Just a minute ago, NYPD was trying to corral the march onto the sidewalk, and it looks like there's a ton of people in the street now. Looks like NYPD is grabbing people now. All right, Jen and I are on the ground, and it's like there's a big conflict right now between NYPD and protesters. Okay, it looks like some of this is broken up. Protesters are still yelling at NYPD. NYPD is yelling at protesters. NYPD is telling protesters that he got hit with water too and is not crying like a baby.
Okay, so basically someone was complaining that they had been hit by water.
Yeah, what ended up actually being bleach.
Okay, and the NYPD's response was, I got hit also, but I'm not crying like a baby.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, super, super nice people.
Right. Okay, so, and just to clarify, it looks like, according to Talia Jane, the journalist, a car parked outside the building was hit with a bag of feces, apparently had its window smashed by the impact. And the NYPD did nothing about it. And here's what we do know, though. Let me just share my screen here, because we do have a post from Stop Arab Hate, which I guess, hold on one second. Let me just, Brad, do you mind if I actually text this to you? Okay, I just texted it to you. And then once you have it up there, I can read it. Oh, that's actually good. That thing at the top, Brad. What is that? Yeah, okay. So Talia Jane tweets out, a man living in the luxury high-rise dumped bleach and feces on a pro-Palestine march passing by below his building yesterday in Midtown Manhattan. NYPD did not respond to the blatant attack, but they did soon after make arrests for standing in the street. Do you recognize him? So everyone take a look at this guy, see if you recognize him. They arrested, and they did arrest people for standing in the street, but they did not even do anything about a guy who had thrown what they found out was bleach and feces. But honestly, anyone throwing something, regardless of what it is, from a high-rise building, you probably should be looking into that, because it can hurt people. Okay. Let's see. Now, this is, I guess, an update from the Summit building, the luxury. Can you click? So it says the Summit is investigating its resident who dumped feces on protesters from his balcony. And here's a photo, and you can see it. Can you click on that first one? So that's the bag he's throwing. Is it like a couple of bags?
It must have been a couple of bags. I mean, it kind of we were all talking about this afterward. It looks like dog bags.
Yeah, it looks like dog poop bags. Yeah.
Dog poop bags.
Yeah.
Wow, I would never do that. Come here, Bucky. Come here. I just want people to know I would never use your dog bags. Well, actually, maybe I would against this guy.
Well,
yeah, this guy might.
I had to take that off the screen. I don't want to give him any ideas.
Oh yeah, good idea. Yeah. So okay, that's disgusting. And needless to say, I mean, if this had been the reverse, if let's just say, pro-Palestine people had thrown bags of feces, dog feces, most likely, but any kind of feces, and bleach from a high-rise balcony, something tells me that the police would not only investigate, but they would probably arrest the person.
Let me just add, Katie, the second image in that tweet we were just looking at is a statement from what appears to be the building.
Okay. Should we read that?
Which would imply to me they know who this person is.
Right.
I would think. Like
Right.
if they're the building and you've got those pictures.
Yes, exactly. They would, and yeah. So they write, we are aware of and deeply disturbed by an incident involving a resident at Summit in which inappropriate and unacceptable behavior occurred. Reminder, the inappropriate and unacceptable behavior was throwing bags of shit and bleach at the person. Okay. Let's hear what else they have to say. We want to be clear. This conduct does not reflect the values or standards of our community. The safety, dignity, and well-being of all our residents, guests, and staff are our highest priority. We are cooperating fully with the local authorities as they investigate the matter and are taking immediate internal action in accordance with our community guidelines and lease agreements. At Summit, we remain committed to fostering a respectful and inclusive environment for all. We recognize the right of residents to express themselves peacefully and respectfully, and we will continue to uphold that right while ensuring the health and safety of our community. Okay, that's interesting. But needless to say, again, if this was the role was reversed, not only would they have done something differently, but can you imagine like the wall-to-wall coverage? I mean, I only know about this because of Twitter.
Yeah, no, for sure. If this had been done by pro-Palestinian protesters, we would not hear the end of it. This would be, you know, the news cycle for the next week or so.
Right.
And you know, like you guys have commented on already, NYPD didn't do anything to try to find out who this guy was. You know, we saw in the video that one police officer basically told everyone to stop being a bitch and crying about getting hit with, again, what ended up being bleach, and, you know, made no moves to go into that building and find out who was actually throwing that stuff.
Well,
Yeah, it was crazy.
we actually have we have footage of this happening. We have footage. This is again by Stop Arab Hate. Here is footage that they posted. And they're asking people to email info@summitnyc.com. But let's take a look at what this looked like. And Brad, thank you for doing this because it's semi breaking news. Yeah. Okay.
I would think that's easily assault.
Yeah.
Easily.
You'd think so. I hadn't seen that video before.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
There's some more.
Oh my God, you can see it there, right? A piece of it?
Yeah.
Ew. That is so disgusting.
And
really
just
gross.
another thing to note, I noticed is whatever it was was heavy enough and struck with enough force that I'm assuming that windshield wasn't broken before.
Right.
Yeah. I wonder if the owner of that vehicle, if they had to file an insurance claim to get that windshield repaired, would they then have to find out who that person was? Like,
yeah, it's a good question.
For those purposes? How is that cop not even looking up?
Maybe it's an inside job. I'm just kidding. I don't really think it was that.
Yeah, they seemed really uninterested in doing anything besides, you know, getting the protesters onto the sidewalk or just like, you know, dispersing the crowd in general.
Right.
And that's kind of crazy though too, seeing that video. I did not realize there was anyone in the car. at the time the poop hit the
Yeah.
windshield. So I mean, just based on that alone, you'd think that the NYPD would be interested in at least helping that guy.
No, I guess not. That's really insane.
Well,
Yeah.
just as an anecdote, in terms of priorities, yesterday I was in a place and they had a TV on, and this was a local news station, and they were running like a 3 or 4 minute segment on some cars being damaged by, I guess, a group of teenagers coming out of like a community center activity or something. So like that warranted like ABC 7 and New York to do like a segment on this damage, and it was like some, I don't know, knocked side mirror or something. This, jeez.
Yeah. Really
That's crazy.
disgusting.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not aware of mainstream media covering this, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. And then I think we have one more video that we haven't seen yet. That is you tweet out a pro-Israel Zionist hurled literal shit from his balcony down on pro-Palestine protesters. NYPD saw and arrested the pro-Palestinian protesters. Or did we already see this video?
I think that's the third one. So I think that's the one where you see the protesters actually
Right.
being arrested on
Yeah.
the street.
Yeah. Wow. So that's pretty crazy. And what else did you observe that's important? I mean, were you at the protest in DC, or because I saw you retweet the People's Forum, but were you there, or were you just at the one in New York City?
I was not. I was at the one in the city.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And so what else did you witness that you think is important to tell people about?
Yeah, so I mean, in that third video, you again see as protesters are kind of trying to again like make their way towards Second Avenue and then toward Grand Central. 3 people are arrested. There were several instances of like fights breaking out between NYPD and the protesters. During that second arrest, so there was one young woman that got arrested, and then there was another younger, I want to say probably like 25-year-old guy who was arrested as well. I mean, NYPD was roughing him up before. They had him like face down on the pavement, and he was struggling. And while that was going on, there was a crowd of press, or at least a couple photographers, whoever else was out there were around him. John and I were around him when I tried to get the mic closer to him so that we could actually hear what he was saying, because they had him again like face down on the pavement, and he was yelling. They pushed me, they pushed whoever else was in the general vicinity just like to the floor. Like they knocked me over. John Freeman picked me up and was like, "It's okay," and then we ran to catch the other people getting arrested as well. So things got pretty tense. And, I have to say, again, I was kind of surprised. It seemed at first it was going to be this very, small, I don't want to say quiet, but uneventful kind of protest day.
Right.
And then it, became very, very much the opposite of that.
Wow. And what else are you working on for Status Quo, or any other reporting that you want to talk about, or anything else that you want to talk about in terms of the recent protests?
Sure. Yeah. So coming up for Status Quo, I have a lot of stuff going on. I think I will be having videos out there pretty regularly now. We will be covering any of the other protests that are coming up in New York City. John and I will be on the ground. I have some other reporting coming out dealing with like labor and climate issues. So yeah, it's going to be busy, but most of my work is going to be at Status Quo. So if people want to see anything that I'm doing, follow Status Quo, and please just follow us to see more of on the ground protest and rally coverage.
Okay, great. And anything else you want to tell us about any of your past reporting or labor stuff or climate stuff? If not, we'll definitely check out what you're doing. But
yeah, I guess I would just say, keep an eye on independent journalism. Keep an eye on independent journalists like myself and at Status Quo who are covering things that actually matter to working people. So labor, climate, all that kind of stuff.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Have a good night, Ashley.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Okay, and that is Ashley Bishop, who just started at Status Quo, and we're so happy that she came on. That was totally last minute. So we're really appreciative, and that is pretty scary footage, and everyone should be on the lookout for that guy. And again, I mean, I know I've said this a couple times, but can you just imagine? Brad, can you come on and kibitz with me for a little bit? Let me vent a little bit. I mean, I know that I've said this, and I know that you agree, but like, can you just imagine the roles reversed?
Oh, well, if the roles were reversed, Katie, and I'm not being hyperbolic, Congress would literally pass policy.
Yeah.
Because that's what they've done in the past. And
True.
For nothing, literally,
Right.
for literally people on campuses asking us to stop facilitating a genocide.
Right. Yeah, Chuck Schumer would probably be at the forefront of that, right?
Yeah. And yet at the same time, I believe it was in Chicago, someone, a Zionist, was it did he shoot a Palestinian child?
Stabbed him to death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As
stabbed
far
him to
as I
death.
can tell,
And then
not a whole lot.
Right,
not a
nothing,
lot
yeah.
came of that.
Right.
So unfortunately, if nothing came of that, I'm not holding my breath regarding something coming of this, even though obviously it should, but it's just a pretty frustrating, and I'm trying not to swear, but like a mind fuck.
Yeah, it really is.
A time to be living in where, you know, I know it sounds kind of like you're crazy or something, but literally reality is literally the opposite.
Exactly. It's the inverse. It's not even a lie, right? It's like the opposite. Like I was actually talking about this with someone the other day, and I can't remember if it was on my show that I kept saying it's the inverse or the truth is inverted. But I was talking about this with someone the other day, that it actually, if you were a Bernie supporter in 2016 or 2020, you actually had like practice with this like Twilight Zone reality where like Bernie would be ahead in a poll, like he would be at the top of a poll, and the way he'd be positioned on like a physical image, they'd have like other people at the top and he'd be at the bottom, you know, like, you know, the only physical attacks that were committed in relation to the Bernie Hillary race, which was constantly, during which the Bernie bro was constantly invoked, the myth of the Bernie bro. There were 2 physical attacks committed by people, men against women, and they were both done by male Hillary supporters against female Bernie supporters, one of whom was Wendell Pierce, that actor from The Wire. And the other one was this like old Democratic donor who, it was caught on video. He hit Mumita with a cane, a young woman of color. He literally hit her with a cane at a Democrat meeting. And the fact that that wasn't like, there wasn't wall-to-wall coverage on that, it just didn't fit the narrative, the Bernie Bro narrative, which was based on a bunch of lies. Totally fabricated. So
I think just on that, I mean, we could talk forever about that sort of stuff, but another example that came to mind, and it's wild that this didn't make huge headlines, was, I believe, his campaign office in Nevada.
Yeah, I think so.
Got shot up.
Right.
Like literally someone did like a drive-by at their campaign office there.
And instead, the only coverage of Nevada, right? Was it where was it where they like accused Bernie bros of throwing chairs? And it was literally one guy lifted up a chair and then a bunch of Bernie bros were like, don't do that. And he put it down.
I can't.
And it was like chairs thrown where all I know it's like, So
but
now.
But that's crazy that despite all of that disillusioning over the past, now 10 years. And yet still I stand by that right now is a total mind fuck.
Yeah, unbelievable. Let's read some super chats. You want to stay on this screen with me? Do you mind?
Sure.
This is much better to do it. Okay. Andrew writes, 2 great guests on one show. I look forward to watching the replay later. Thanks, Andrew. Antonat, it was a great and unexpected honor to meet Professor Finkelstein in DC on Saturday. Medea Benjamin too. I'm newly inspired. Wow, I'll forward that to Norman. I am I and I super sticker. Thank you. Looks like a cute cat. Lordy L gifted 5 Katie Halper memberships. Thank you.
Wow.
That's so generous. Silvio Pina writes, wonderful Mr. Finkelstein. I love his clear, calm delivery. I need to learn to slow mine down. Very inspiring. Grazie from Bolognese in LA. Nice. Thank you so much. Me. Thank you for the super chat. Sparky, great work. Love Katie and Norm. Thanks, Sparky. Sparky, Jew and Gentile alike, Americans were getting on with their lives in the first few decades after World War II, which was the point of winning the war for most of them in the first place. The Holocaust, more from Sparky, the Holocaust TV miniseries in the late 1970s was when most Americans were inspired to keep the horrors of the Holocaust on their minds. And as Norm writes in his opus, the Holocaust industry was also because of the 1967 war. So related time-wise. Sparky, a kid in the 1960s, my barber and bank teller had numbers, tattooed on their arms. I asked them what it was, and they matter-of-factly said they got them in a concentration camp. Neither burst into tears. Sparky, if you're watching, let us know. You don't have to pay for this. Just let us know in the chat where you grew up. I'm just curious. Zia Partovi, super sticker. Thank you. It's funny. I saw Zio at first. I thought it said Zio at first, and I was like, oh, it's going to be a troll. Paul Gibby writes, the wheels of justice grind slowly but exceedingly fine. Too late for so many Palestinians, but it's happening. Thank you, Katie and Norman. I mean, I can't respond to this too much because I'm going to get so upset and I'm going to lose it. And we have some more stuff to get through, but yes, too late for so many Palestinians. Spelling correction, neither birth here. Thank you, Sparky. More Sparky. Joy admitted she allowed her audience to believe she was Jewish, so she'd have comic cred. You can't blame her. Kiara, Professor Anthony Lerman's book, Whatever Happened to Anti-Semitism, Redefinition and the Myth of the Collective Jew, is a fantastic read. I may have that. Thanks for reminding me, Kiara. I'll look into see if I have that or not. I am. Beautiful to hear the truth in a Brooklyn accent. True. Can't afford much. Irene Bertone or Irene Bertoni. I don't know why. Can't afford much, Katie. Thank you. 58-year-old NYC Goy here, but a big Norm fan. So I tried to answer as many questions in the chat as I could based on my knowledge. Thanks, Irene. Mark Bedar Pelsha. As usual, you two rock. Well, thank you. Mark sounds like a very smart person. Sparky, keep in mind, Israel has killed many more Americans than Iran. Remember the USS Liberty. True. And we had Ray McGovern on Useful Idiots the other day, and he talked about that. So that was also covered up by the Israeli government and the U.S. government. Sparky, how do we know Israel's not the 51st state? If Israel was the 51st state, it would only control 2 senators. That's really good. Let's screenshot that. Yeah, really good. Hi, Rev Edmund Bolea. How can we, I have to ask you if it's a Spanish pronunciation or Italian pronunciation. So, if it's Bolela or Bolea. Okay. How can we discuss the crimes of U.S. empire when most Americans have no idea we are an empire? It is frustrating as an anti-imperialist. Very good question. And I wish I knew the answer. Zionism. Oh, were you going to say something, Brad?
I was just going to say, like,
through shows like these.
Maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'm being foolish, but I kind of believe, like, internally, like maybe in a way that they can't vocalize or like identify or label, I feel like a lot of people have to know that the US is an empire. You know, like even if they can't articulate it, like deep down, I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I honestly don't know, because like, what if they don't follow alternative media and stuff?
The Economist and Pew need to do a poll on that.
Yeah, they seriously do. Yeah, and it can't just be self opt-in.
Right.
Okay, let's see. What do we got? Zionism has plotted the elimination of Palestinians from Palestine since 1895. Herzl, Weizmann, Jabotinsky, Ben Gurion, etc. That's true, and we could definitely like quote them at another point. Thank you, Wade Worth, always so generous. Sparky, Norm, did the Union occupation during Reconstruction of the Deep South introduce anti-Semitism to the region? The Confederate Secretary of State was Judah P. Benjamin. All right, I'm going to take a screenshot of this also to show him. Mark Bedar Pichah writes, Noam Chomsky used to say that the last 3 paragraphs of a New York Times article are the news about the 140 pages.
I could be wrong, but like basically the New York Times would have a very, very long read,
Right.
but then like 100 paragraphs down.
Right. Is the important stuff. Yeah. I mean, they kind of did that when they wrote that article about the sexual torture
Right. Yeah.
at Stay Teman. You had to read really far down in the article to hear about that part.
Yeah.
An open door Jewish rescue in the Philippines from FU. Thanks. I assume maybe that's a book. All right. I'll look into that. That's fascinating. Tyler Trestick. Oh my God. Look at that cute pooch.
Oh, gee.
Thank you, Katie. Love Norm. I wish I had a bigger online presence. Haha. Oh, I wish he had a bigger online presence. Haha. Love watching you and Aaron throughout the week too. Again, thank you for what you and your colleagues do for us. Oh, thank you. And that dog is so freaking cute. Firefay83. Whitney Webb is a national treasure. Yes, agreed. And thank you so much for that. Sparky. Oh, Sparky's from Atlanta. I asked him about that. Interesting. Oh, wow. So, okay. I don't blame Joy. It's very tough for women comics when she was coming up. True. And yeah, I think that's it. Now we're going to, I really don't want to end on this note. Oh, look at that. Brad made that Pillsbury Doughboy. Get to know the Pillsbury Doughboy because Norm did say that that's what Bill Maher looked like. Someone wrote, does that dog have dentures though? If that's about Bucky, you're
in trouble. Yeah.
In trouble. But luckily he's canine. He's tooth positive. Look at him. It does look like dentures because they're so perfect. Right, Bucks? Look at his little bow tie. He is so cute. By the way, when I was away, Brad had the pleasure of getting to babysit Bucky, right? Dog sit him.
Yeah.
Was he good? Was he such a good boy?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
He's so cute. All right. So sorry, Bucks, hold on. So I mentioned we were going to show
this quick asks, how did he tie that?
Oh yeah, it's a good question. I can't give away his secrets.
Yeah.
So this is a really low thing to go out on, but I feel like we should show it because it's such an important story. And then maybe I'll just show Bucky again afterwards to like put people in better mood.
And the other meme I was trying to think of something for was to answer like why he wrote his book and all of that stuff. And I didn't completely succeed, but it was kind of a work in progress. Here it is. Kind of a play off of this famous painting.
Oh yeah, American Gothic. This is good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is good. Yeah. That's great. Wait, well, let me say that again. What's on his pitchfork?
Money.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Uh-oh, you're going to call it an anti-Semite.
Well, no, because Norman was saying he needed to get his donors back.
It's true. It's true. And I think in the book, actually, Chuck calls himself cheap. I'm gonna tell him he's an anti-Semite. So this is the last thing we're going to show, and there really is no way to like.
Cheap unless you're approving money for Zionists and.
What do you say?
I said he's cheap unless you're talking about approving money for Zionists and all that. Yeah.
Right. All right. So let's just have a let's just show this video because we mentioned this atrocious story with Norman. He hadn't seen it. I totally understand. I don't judge him at all for not being able to watch this stuff because it's not like he's hiding his head in the sand. No. I get that he can't necessarily ingest all of it. And as you can see, he's, very disturbed by what, was done to medical workers. And he has been talking about this for a while about how Israel will.
Yeah, he's been steeped in this stuff for decades.
Right. Yeah. But and if you watch Monday Morning, Aaron and I did cover it, but I do feel like I should cover it. Again, it's like really disturbing. So if you feel like you can't deal with it, I understand. Again, everyone who's watching this show obviously cares about this issue. So we're just going to play this clip from Fox News.
It's about a minute 40 seconds. So anyone that doesn't care to watch it,
Yeah.
about a minute and 40 seconds.
Paramedics from the Palestine Red Crescent dig through the earth of southern Gaza. They're recovering the bodies of their colleagues killed by Israeli forces. On March 23rd, first responders were dispatched to this area of Rafah. When they arrived, Israeli soldiers opened fire.
Health workers should never be a target, and yet we're here today digging up a mass grave of first responders and paramedics.
On March 31st, the IDF provided a statement to Fox News saying, quote, several vehicles were identified advancing suspiciously toward IDF troops without headlights or emergency signals. Video released 5 days later by the Palestine Red Crescent directly contradicts that statement. The IDF also claimed in the initial findings that 9 out of the 15 medics were operatives in Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Asked multiple times for evidence to support that claim, none was provided. Funerals were held late last week for those killed by Israeli bullets. Families mourning the dead, mothers trying to make sense of the senseless. He went to save the martyrs and injured, and we've been waiting for him for a week. We were told that he was either martyred or injured, but I realized that they had killed them from the very first moment. They had killed them and buried them underground. As bodies of these medics rest inside white plastic bags with a photo attached, the face of Rifat Radwan stands out, the man who recorded his final moments with a final message. Forgive me, Mother. This is the path I chose, to help people, he said.
So that is the message that he left his mother. He recorded for his mother. And he actually said, forgive me, Mother, this is the path I chose to help people. The army has arrived.
I feel like, I hope I'm wrong, but I feel like every single day that the world allows this to continue, I feel like we're basically being like stripped of kind of like a collective humanity, if whatever that was is being ripped away.
Yeah.
Like I just don't understand how this can just be allowed to continue.
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, it's like I've said this before, but words really do fail.
Yeah.
There was also a journalist, 2 journalists now have been killed. There was a Israel set fire to a tent. I don't know if they set fire to the tent or if it was a bombing.
This is like literally every day.
I know.
Something, one of these things every day.
Right. Yeah. So one of them had been killed and one of them was in critical condition, and the one who was in critical condition has succumbed to his injuries, so he's now deceased. I'm just going to show his picture. And Mossab Abu Toha tweeted this out. 1 second.
I'm sorry, do you need me to do something?
I can do it unless you want. I mean, I can just do it,
sure,
right? So,
sure.
So Mossab tweeted out, Ahmed Mansour has just died. This was, yeah. Yeah. So he was a journalist, and everyone should be following Mossab, by the way. Oh my God, I'm sorry, I did not mean to scroll there. That's a picture, by the way, from, I believe that was provided by Dr. Perlmutter, who we had on, and we made that Patreon only free, but we wanted to make sure it didn't get us, well, first of all, we wanted people to be warned about it, but we also didn't want it to get us like penalized by YouTube. And then the other, let's see, Nate, who does research for the show, wrote 100 kids are killed or injured per day at the moment. Nate, can you, while we're doing this, look up the name of the other journalist killed? I just want to make sure that that I mention him also. And also want to show a kind of, I think, really interesting article. Not the whole thing, just part of it. 1 second. Let's see where I tweeted this out. It's by Tony Greenstein, who I mention all the time. Let me go to his blog. He is the person who wrote the great book Zionism During the Holocaust. And he had a piece. Where is it? Sorry about this. We really need to update his Brad, you got to help him update his website because it's not very social media friendly. It's like, when you put a link, it's supposed to preview it. Okay, so it's on Blogspot. So we may have to get him to migrate it. But okay, here's what I think is an interesting article. And again, he wrote the excellent book, Zionism During the Holocaust. Oops, sorry. Okay. So he writes, even the Nazis didn't murder Red Cross workers and bomb hospitals, schools, and ambulances. Israel's execution of 15 Red Crescent and aid workers marks a new low. On 24 April 1945, when Berlin was liberated, the Jewish hospital was functioning, its 800 Jewish patients still alive.
Wow.
So, yeah, I don't know.
But then for this to be happening at the same time that currently the world's largest military superpower is making moves to basically do away with the Constitution so that the president has unilateral authority to pretty much do whatever, and this particular president, for whatever reason, seems to be enthusiastic about continuing this genocide, and not to mention, stoking war with Iran
right.
on Israel's behalf. Boy,
yeah.
it's. I understand how easy it is to succumb to like nihilism and cynicism, right. And I think it's important. Like you need to make a conscious choice not to. And having communities like this, everyone here watching, the people that come on this show, I guess that's what helps me.
Yeah.
Not succumb to just, hopelessness.
Yeah, and despair. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you haven't seen it yet, the movie The Encampments. And
no, I haven't seen it yet.
Something that gave me like hope and also kind of encouragement to just keep going, whatever you can do, is when I interviewed Claire Daly and Mick Wallace for Useful Idiots, and they were saying how the people of Yemen were like so excited and moved by the protests. And when I saw this documentary, The Encampments, which is all about the encampments in Colombia in particular, and actually one of the main characters is Mahmoud Khalil. There was a famous journalist from Gaza. She won her name, Bizan Auda. Wizard Bizan is her name, but her name on Twitter, but her name and Instagram, Bizan Auda. And she was talking about the encampments and how kind of moving they were for her. And she starts crying. And also you see these children who are like holding up thank you signs. Again, none of this is sufficient, obviously. I'm not like dismissing it.
No, I mean, if anything, I guess it reinforces, if you ever think that it doesn't matter, resisting in whatever way, shape, or form that you can. Clearly, it does matter to the people, like you were just articulating. But also, if it didn't matter, if it made absolutely no difference, the empire would not put forth energy and resources into suppressing it. If it didn't matter and make a difference.
Right. They wouldn't be suppressing the protest. They wouldn't be making speech illegal. That's actually
all of that.
A really important point to make. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's absolutely awful. It did, and just an update. It was a bombing. That was what set the tent on fire, basically, and it killed the first journalist it killed was Helmi al-Fakawi, and that was a journalist. It also killed a man named Youssef al-Khazindar, and 9 others, including 6 journalists, were injured. And then, as we added, tragically, the other journalist who was injured has died. So, yeah, just know, I mean, it's kind of a little comfort, but you are on the right side of history, people. And so,
and I just wanted to throw out there, sorry to interject, but just, you know, and I know we've talked about this before on the program several times, but when I see comments that basically, please try not to conflate Judaism and Zionism.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's if you like this show, I'm a Jew. If you like Norman Finkelstein, he's a Jew. If you like Aaron Mate, he's a Jew. If you like Max Blumenthal, he's a Jew. If you like the people who took over Grand Central Station, bunch of Jews. If you like Gabor Mate, he's a Jew. If you like all of the Holocaust survivors I've been interviewing for this documentary that Brad and I are working on, about Holocaust survivors protesting Gaza, they're Jews. And if you conflate the two things, you're actually doing Israel's bidding. So whenever I see that, I ask them, I say, I hope Israel's throwing you a few shekels, because what you're doing is you're misrepresenting reality, but you're also doing Israel a favor. Because every time they see someone write something anti-Semitic, they get to pretend that anti-Zionists are anti-Semites. And, you know, to some extent, I get it for people who aren't exposed. But if you, you know, to very, like, I get it. It's one thing if you're like living in Palestine and the only Jews you see are Zionists. So when you say like Jews this, Jews that, that's different. Yeah. But totally. Anyone like in the comments,
you know, like if you're here, you know, in the West and say stuff like the world, we're being run by an international Jewish cabal or something like that.
Yeah. No. Yeah. The cabal is interfaith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And any one that would fall into the Jewish category, the more important descriptor is these are Zionists.
Right.
Totally different.
Totally. Yeah. Yep. And
Albert Einstein, Jewish. Didn't like Zionists.
Israel critic. Yeah. I'm not sure. Yeah. Who called Israel fascist? Hannah Arendt also.
Smart guy.
Yeah. Pretty smart, you may think. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Miko Pellet, another one.
Yeah.
Anyway. Well,
not Joy Behar, apparently.
Not Joy Behar. Thank God for the sake of my people. Thank God. Yeah. Anyway, thank you guys so much. To see the full interview with Whitney Webb, please go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. It's a fascinating interview, and we get into lots of things, including Israel and Zionism and the way that Zionists use the Holocaust and anti-Semitism as a weapon. So, and to do dissidents, also more anti-Zionist Jewish voices.
You need to show Bucky again, probably.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Bucks, come here.
I didn't even read that in the chat. I'm just kind of speaking.
He's all curled up in my. You know, dogs like these cozy things. So
I didn't even read that in the chat. I was just speaking for myself.
I love him so much. Isn't he the cutest?
His face.
He's so sweet. He's like a love bug. He loves pets. He loves being pet. And he loves, right? Brad took great photos of him in the park. They're so
we'll have to share some of those.
Yeah, that's good. Maybe Patreons should get
Bucky's
early access.
Bucky is very photogenic.
He really is.
Yeah.
His teeth, lol. Yeah, you mean his teeth are so awesome? Okay, it's called malocclusion if you want to pathologize it. He doesn't need braces. They're special.
Has the dog ever gotten braces?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
So much.
Yeah. But trust me, he's fine with his teeth. I didn't get the sense that he
No, he eats. Yeah.
He's totally fine.
Yeah. And then last comment. Pete Hegseth was introduced to the media by Lindsey Graham around 2010. Prior to that, Hegseth was Graham's Joy Boy. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Oh, and I don't know if this was the person who commented earlier, but Worldwide said it was a joke.
Oh, okay.
So-
Oh, and right. I forgot to. Oh, the Israelis also buried the cars from the Hannibal directive attack on the music concert on the 7th of October. Yeah. Another thing that Chuck Schumer considers anti-Semitic is mentioning that Israel killed its own. It's called facts. All right. Like the stream if you haven't already. Subscribe by hitting subscribe and then pressing the bell. And we will see you next week. Thanks so much, Nate, Brad, Phantom Bisfanta, and Andrew. Bye, everyone. And Bucky.
Okay, calm down.